Lydia Monroe had touched 1,000 men in her career, handshakes, shoulder pats, calculated gestures of corporate authority. But when her fingers brushed the collar of the quiet janitor in the executive hallway, adjusting his crooked tie with the same unconscious grace she'd use on a boardroom colleague, she felt him stop breathing. Literally stop. His chest froze mid-inhale, his eyes went wide, and for 3 impossible seconds, the most powerful woman in the building and the most invisible man shared something that shouldn't have existed. By morning, the security footage would go viral internally. By week's end, both their lives would shatter. Because some moments, however small, change everything. Thank you for joining this story. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I'd love to see how far this tale travels. Now, let's begin where it all fell apart. The fluorescent lights of Monroe Industries' 42nd floor hummed with the same sterile efficiency that defined everything Lydia Monroe touched. It was 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday, that dead zone between the exodus of junior staff and the arrival of the executive cleaning crew, when the building belonged to neither the ambitious nor the invisible. Lydia stood alone in the corridor outside her corner office, reviewing acquisition figures on her tablet, her Louboutins clicking an impatient rhythm against Italian marble as she processed numbers that would make or break a $250 million deal. She didn't notice him at first. Caleb Reed had perfected the art of occupying space without claiming it, moving through the executive floors with the practiced invisibility of someone who understood that being seen often meant being questioned. He pushed his cleaning cart with deliberate quietness, the wheels recently oiled because squeaking drew attention, his company polo tucked in despite the fact that no one ever looked at him long enough to notice. At 31, he'd learned that true survival meant mastering the background, becoming part of the architecture rather than the action. But his tie was crooked. The cheap polyester navy thing that came with his uniform had twisted during his shift, the knot sliding askew after he'd helped lift a fallen partition in the mailroom. It was a small imperfection, the kind of detail that wouldn't matter to anyone, except that Lydia Monroe noticed everything. Her success had been built on seeing what others missed, the hesitation in a negotiator's voice, the tremor in a competitor's confidence, the single loose thread that could unravel an entire strategy. Her hand moved before her brain fully registered the decision. "Excuse me," she said, not looking up from her tablet, her voice carrying that particular blend of authority and distraction that characterized powerful people accustomed to being obeyed. "Your tie." Caleb's entire body went rigid. In 3 years of working the executive floors, he'd exchanged perhaps 20 words total with anyone above director level. His survival strategy depended on being part of the scenery, as noticeable as the fire extinguisher or the abstract art that no one actually looked at. Being directly addressed by Lydia Monroe violated every unspoken rule of his carefully constructed invisibility. "Miss Monroe, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to," he started, his voice rough from disuse, already stepping backward. "Hold still," she said, finally glancing up, and that's when everything tilted sideways. She'd intended a quick adjustment, the kind of unconscious gesture she'd performed 100 times with executives before investor meetings or press conferences. A casual assertion of standards that kept her world ordered. Her fingers reached for his collar with the same easy confidence she brought to every interaction, expecting compliance, expecting insignificance. Instead, the moment her hands touched the fabric at his throat, Caleb Reed stopped breathing. Not metaphorically, not romantically. He actually ceased respiratory function, his chest locking mid-inhale, as if her touch had triggered some kind of biological emergency protocol. His eyes, remarkable eyes, she noticed with clinical detachment, gray-blue like winter storms, went wide with something that looked uncomfortably close to panic. His hands, which had been gripping the handle of his cleaning cart, went white-knuckled with tension. Lydia froze, her fingers still at his collar, suddenly hyper-aware of the warmth of his skin beneath the cheap fabric, the elevated pulse she could feel hammering at the base of his throat. The moment stretched into something elastic and dangerous, the fluorescent hummed silence wrapping around them like a living thing. "Breathe," she said quietly, surprised by the gentleness in her own voice. He did, a shuddering inhale that seemed to restart his entire system. The spell broke. Lydia's hands completed their task with professional efficiency, straightening the tie, smoothing the collar, stepping back to a proper distance. The entire interaction had lasted perhaps 10 seconds. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. "There," she said, her voice returning to its normal, controlled modulation. "That's better." Caleb nodded, still incapable of speech, and practically fled down the hallway with his cart, the wheels suddenly squeaking because he'd forgotten to move carefully. Lydia watched him go with an expression she couldn't quite name, then shook her head and returned to her acquisition figures, determined to classify the moment as an anomaly, a glitch in the otherwise smooth operation of her carefully controlled universe. By 8:23 a.m. the next morning, she'd learn exactly how wrong that determination had been. "Have you seen this?" Marcus Chen, her VP of Operations, stood in her office doorway holding his phone like it contained evidence of corporate espionage. "It's everywhere." Lydia looked up from her morning briefing materials, her second espresso already cooling on her desk. "I don't have time for whatever internet drama is trending, Marcus. The Tecton acquisition closes in 6 weeks and their CEO is getting cold feet about." "It's you," Marcus interrupted, which was unprecedented enough that Lydia actually set down her pen. "You and one of the cleaning staff? Security footage from last night?" The temperature in her office seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Show me." He handed over his phone and Lydia watched a silent, grainy security camera recording of her own actions from 16 hours earlier. From the elevated angle, the interaction looked different, more intimate somehow. The way she'd reached for him, the way he'd frozen, the length of time her hands had lingered at his collar, the way they'd stood, closer than professional distance dictated, her head tilted up to meet his eyes in the final seconds before he'd fled. "Who leaked this?" Her voice could have frozen nitrogen. "No one leaked it," Marcus said carefully. "Phillips in security mentioned it to someone in accounting who thought it was funny because, Lydia Monroe doesn't exactly interact with the maintenance staff. They posted it in the general Slack channel as a joke. Even the CEO has a heart or some nonsense like that. It's been shared to 4 other channels. Someone's already made a GIF." Lydia's jaw tightened. In the decade she'd spent building Monroe Industries from a regional player into a global force, she'd learned that perception shaped reality more than facts ever could. And the perception of this footage, however innocent the actual interaction, was dangerous. "Remove it," she said flatly. "Every instance. And find out who posted it originally." "Already done," Marcus replied. "But Lydia, people talk. The damage control window on this closed about 3 hours ago. The rumor mill is already running." "What rumors?" She kept her voice level, but her fingers had gone still on her keyboard, a tell that Marcus had learned to read as code for controlled fury. "That you're involved with someone. That Monroe Industries' untouchable CEO has a secret relationship with a janitor. That it's romantic. That it's scandalous. That it's—" He paused, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, people are bored. This is entertainment for them. By Monday, it'll be forgotten." Marcus left, but his optimism proved wildly inaccurate. By Monday, the whispers had evolved into a full ecosystem of speculation. Lydia could feel the change in how people looked at her in the hallways, the slight hesitation before greetings, the way conversations would stop when she approached the break room. Monroe Industries employed 2,400 people across 7 floors. Apparently all of them had opinions about her personal life. She'd built her reputation on being untouchable, a strategic decision made consciously at 25 when she'd realized that perceived invulnerability granted more power than actual competence. The Monroe name carried weight, old money, and older connections, but Lydia had always known that being Charles Monroe's daughter only opened doors. Walking through them and claiming the room required something else entirely. She'd cultivated an image of absolute control, someone for whom emotion was a tool to be deployed strategically rather than experienced genuinely. The idea of her being humanly, messily attracted to anyone, let alone someone so far outside her sphere, contradicted the entire architecture of her carefully constructed persona. The whispers reached her family by Tuesday. Her mother called at 7 a.m., because Patricia Monroe believed that difficult conversations should happen before the target was fully caffeinated. "Lydia, darling, I've heard the most peculiar story from Constance Hartford, whose son works in your IT department. Her mother's voice carried that particular blend of concern and calculation that Lydia had learned to decode in childhood. Something about you and a janitor. It was a 30-second interaction, Mother. Someone's tie was crooked. I straightened it. The internet has decided this is newsworthy. The internet isn't the problem, sweetheart. The problem is that you're 33 years old, unmarried, and apparently the subject of romantic speculation involving inappropriate partners. Do you understand how this looks to the board, to our investors, to potential merger partners? Lydia pinched the bridge of her nose, feeling the familiar tension headache building behind her eyes. I'm aware of the optics, Mother. I'm handling it. By doing what? Lydia, the spring charity circuit is about to begin. The Hartford merger is still on the table. Gregory Hartford is interested in a tax-advantaged corporate marriage that would consolidate our market share in the Northeast. I'm not interested in being a chess piece in Father's expansion strategy. Your father built this company so you could have opportunities, Lydia. The least I could do is run it successfully, which I have been doing for 6 years. I'll handle the situation. Tell Constance Hartford that her son should spend less time gossiping and more time fixing our server latency issues. She hung up before her mother could respond, a small act of rebellion that would cost her later but felt necessary in the moment. The problem was, her mother was right about one thing. Perception mattered. And the perception that Lydia Monroe was emotionally compromised, distracted by romance, or making decisions based on feelings rather than strategy could undermine years of careful positioning. She needed to stop the speculation, which meant she needed to address the source. Caleb Reed learned about the video the same way he learned about most things that happened in the rarefied atmosphere of the executive floors, through Jose Martinez, his supervisor and the closest thing he had to a friend in the building. Bro, you're famous, Jose said Wednesday morning, catching Caleb before his shift started. Everyone's talking about you and the Ice Queen. Caleb's stomach dropped. What are you talking about? Jose pulled out his phone, showed him the footage. Caleb watched himself freeze like a deer in headlights, watched Lydia Monroe's hands at his collar, watched the moment stretch into something that looked, from the camera's perspective, like a scene from a movie he'd never signed up to be in. This is everywhere? His voice came out strangled. Internal channels only, but yeah, man. Everyone's seen it. People are taking bets on whether you're, secretly dating her or something. Jose laughed, completely missing the panic in Caleb's expression. Can you imagine? You and Lydia Monroe? That's like, I don't know, Beauty and the Beast level romance right there. I need you to stop talking, Caleb said quietly, his mind racing through implications. He'd spent 3 years being invisible specifically to avoid this kind of attention. His entire life depended on not being noticed, not being questioned, not being the subject of curiosity or speculation. He had reasons for that. Good reasons. Reasons that woke him up at 3 a.m. in their small apartment, asking for water and reassurance that Daddy wasn't going to disappear. Come on, don't be weird about it, Jose continued, oblivious. It's kind of cool, actually, like the most powerful woman in the building noticed you exist. That's got to count for something. Caleb didn't answer. He clocked in, grabbed his cart, and spent the next 8 hours in a state of low-grade panic, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Security would review his background. They'd find inconsistencies in his application, ask questions about the 2-year gap in his work history, wonder why a 31-year-old man with a degree in engineering was pushing a cleaning cart for $16.50 an hour. They'd find out about Ethan. They'd ask questions about custody arrangements. They'd discover that Caleb's entire existence was built on a foundation of carefully maintained obscurity, and that foundation was now cracking. The summons came Thursday afternoon, delivered via email from Patricia Holloway in HR. Mr. Reed, please report to Conference Room C at 4 p.m. today. This is not disciplinary, but your attendance is required. Not disciplinary, right, because HR always specified that when it was true. Caleb spent the last hour of his shift composing explanatory texts to his neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who picked up Ethan from kindergarten on Thursdays. If this meeting went badly, if they fired him, he'd need to be at the school by 5:30. He'd need to explain to a 5-year-old why Daddy's job had ended suddenly. He'd need to figure out how to make rent next month without this paycheck. Conference Room C was one of the smaller meeting spaces, all glass walls and ergonomic chairs, the kind of room where careers were quietly ended with professional courtesy. Caleb arrived at 3:58 p.m., his heart hammering against his ribs, his mouth dry. Lydia Monroe was already there, seated at the head of the table, and the shock of seeing her in this context, not glimpsed from a distance, not captured on security footage, but real and present and looking directly at him, nearly stopped him in the doorway. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice professionally neutral. "Please sit down." He sat, keeping his hands flat on the table to hide their trembling. The glass walls of the conference room felt like a fishbowl, everyone in the corridor able to see this interaction, which would only fuel more speculation. "I'm not going to waste your time with pleasantries," Lydia began, and Caleb appreciated that, at least. "I'm sure you're aware of the security footage that's been circulating." "Yes, ma'am." "Please don't call me ma'am. It makes me feel approximately 90 years old." A slight twist of her mouth that might have been humor. "The situation has created complications. For both of us, I imagine." Caleb said nothing, waiting for the actual termination to land. "I need it to stop," Lydia continued. "The speculation, the gossip, the constant questions about my personal life. I've built this company on a reputation for strategic thinking and emotional discipline. The current narrative undermines that." "I understand," Caleb said quietly. "If you need me to transfer to a different shift or a different building, I can—" "That would only confirm the speculation," she interrupted. "No, I have a different solution, one that will require your cooperation, but one that I believe will serve both our interests." She pulled out a tablet, slid it across the table. Caleb looked down at a document, dense with legal language that would take him hours to parse. "The summary version," Lydia said, reading his expression accurately, "is that I'm proposing we confirm the relationship publicly. Not the real situation, obviously there is no actual relationship, but a curated, controlled version of one. 6 months. Public appearances at charity events, a few carefully staged photographs, enough to satisfy the gossip mill and then naturally fade when you decide this lifestyle isn't for you." Caleb stared at her like she'd started speaking ancient Greek. "You want to pretend to date me?" "I want to control the narrative before it controls me," she corrected. "Currently, I have no power over the speculation. People are writing their own stories. This gives us the authorship." "Why would you possibly want that? I'm a janitor. You're—" He gestured vaguely at her, the corner office, the entire building. "You're you. How does this help your reputation?" "Because mysterious is better than weak," Lydia said, and there was something fierce in her voice now, something that reminded Caleb that this woman hadn't built an empire through timidity. "If I'm dating someone inappropriate by conventional standards, that makes me unpredictable, bold, someone who doesn't follow expected patterns. If I'm perceived as emotionally compromised or distracted by rumor and innuendo, that makes me vulnerable. I'd rather be unpredictable." "And what do I get out of this?" Caleb heard himself ask, even though the smart play was to refuse immediately, to protect his carefully maintained invisibility. "Compensation," Lydia said bluntly. "Significant compensation. A new position at the company, something appropriate for someone supposedly in a relationship with the CEO. Full benefits, including health insurance that would cover dependents, a housing allowance, a wardrobe budget, and at the end of 6 months, a severance package that would give you options." The number she named made Caleb's vision blur slightly. That amount of money would mean stability for Ethan. Real stability. The kind where he didn't lie awake calculating whether they could afford both the heating bill and fresh vegetables. The kind where he could maybe, finally, hire a lawyer to properly formalize custody arrangements, to make sure that the nightmare of 2 years ago could never happen again. "I need to think about it," he said, his voice rough. "You have until tomorrow at 5 p.m., Lydia replied. "After that, the offer expires. I'll pursue a different strategy." She stood, extending her hand for a professional shake. Caleb stood as well, taking her hand, and felt that same electric jolt from the hallway, that same sense of standing on the edge of something vast and dangerous. "For what it's worth," Lydia said, still holding his hand, "I don't make offers I don't believe are mutually beneficial. Think about what you need, Mr. Reed, not what you think you deserve. What you actually need." Then she was gone, leaving Caleb alone in the glass conference room, staring at a tablet full of legal language and a decision that could change everything. Chat. Caleb picked up Ethan from Mrs. Chen's apartment at 6:15 p.m., right on schedule. His son came barreling into his arms with the unrestrained enthusiasm of 5-year-olds everywhere, already talking a mile a minute about the picture he'd drawn at school and how Tommy Peterson had shared his cookies at lunch, and could they please get a pet fish because fish were cool and didn't need walking like dogs. "Maybe, buddy," Caleb said, hoisting Ethan onto his hip even though the kid was getting too big for it. "Let's get home first." Their apartment was a one-bedroom in a building that charitably could be called transitional. Caleb slept on the couch and had converted the bedroom into Ethan's space, a decision that his son didn't question because 5-year-olds assumed their reality was normal. The walls were thin enough that they could hear their neighbors' conversations. The heat was unreliable, and the elevator had been broken for 6 months. But it was theirs, safe, anonymous. Nobody asked questions. While Ethan played with his toy cars on the living room floor, Caleb made dinner, spaghetti with jarred sauce, the kind of meal that stretched a budget and filled a growing kid. He'd gotten good at this, the single-parent dance, the constant calculation of time and money and attention. Some days he felt like he was drowning. Most days he felt like he was one unexpected expense away from catastrophe. "Daddy, you're doing the thinking face," Ethan observed, looking up from his cars. "What's the thinking face, buddy?" "The one where you look sad, but you're trying not to be sad, so I won't be sad." Ethan's insight was devastating in its accuracy. "Did something bad happen?" "No, baby. Nothing bad. Daddy's just trying to make a big decision." "About what?" "How did you explain to a 5-year-old that you were considering entering a fake relationship with a billionaire to secure his future?" "You didn't. You simplified." "About a new job opportunity. It would mean some changes. Different schedule, maybe? Different responsibilities. Would you still pick me up from school?" And there it was, the only question that actually mattered. "Always, buddy. No matter what job I have, I'll always pick you up." Ethan seemed satisfied with that answer, returning to his cars. Caleb drained the pasta, watching his son through the steam, and thought about Lydia Monroe's offer. The money would change their lives. But money always came with strings, and he'd learned the hard way that strings could become chains. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Lydia Monroe. I realized I didn't give you a way to contact me with your decision. This is my direct line." Just the fact that Lydia Monroe had his personal cell number felt surreal. Caleb stared at the message, then typed back, "I have a son, 5 years old. This would affect him." The response came within seconds. "I understand. That's actually a point in favor of the arrangement. A relationship including a child reads as more authentic, more serious, but we'd need to discuss parameters around his involvement." "His involvement isn't negotiable," Caleb typed back, feeling protective anger rise. "He's not a prop." "I wouldn't expect him to be. But we'd need to be thoughtful about exposure, about what he understands, about protecting him from speculation. I don't have children, Mr. Reed, but I'm not a monster." Caleb set down the phone, served dinner, and tried to focus on Ethan's chatter about kindergarten politics and the complex social dynamics of the block area. But his mind kept returning to that conference room, to Lydia Monroe's face when she'd said, "Think about what you need." He needed security. He needed insurance. He needed the kind of money that meant Ethan could have new shoes when he needed them, not when Caleb could finally afford them. He needed the resources to fight if he ever had to protect his son from the kinds of threats that woke him up at night. After Ethan was asleep, Caleb pulled out the tablet Lydia had given him and actually read through the contract. It was thorough, almost painfully so. Public appearances at specified events, social media coordination, appropriate relationship behaviors in professional settings, a detailed compensation structure tied to completion of the 6-month term, termination clauses that protected both parties, an ironclad NDA that would survive the end of the arrangement. But there were also protections he hadn't expected, clauses about maintaining his privacy outside of agreed-upon public appearances, language protecting any dependence from media exposure without explicit consent, a guarantee that his employment at Monroe Industries would continue regardless of the arrangement's outcome, an education fund provision that made his throat tight. Lydia Monroe was offering him a deal, yes, but she'd structured it like someone who understood that he had something to lose, something to protect. That surprised him. He'd expected her to approach this like a business transaction where he was the purchased commodity. Instead, the contract read like a partnership between unequal parties trying to achieve mutual goals. At 11 p.m., he picked up his phone and texted, "I need to meet with you again to discuss terms around my son. If we can agree on that, I'll sign." The response was immediate. "Tomorrow, 8 a.m., my office. Bring him if you need to." Caleb stared at that last line. Bring him if you need to. It was a small thing, an accommodation for his reality as a single parent, but it felt like more than anyone in a position of power had ever offered him. He texted back, "I'll come alone, but I need you to understand that he comes first in every decision. That's not negotiable." "I wouldn't respect you if it was," came the reply. 8 a.m., Mr. Reed. Lydia's office at 8 a.m. was flooded with early light, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city that never failed to remind her of how far she'd climbed. She'd arrived at 6:30, as always, using the quiet hours to process the previous day's decisions and plan the current day's battles. The Tecton acquisition was stalling. Her VP of Finance was pushing for restructuring that would eliminate 200 jobs. Her mother had called twice more with increasingly pointed questions about Gregory Hartford and age-appropriate relationship choices. The Caleb Reed situation should have been a minor footnote in a week of major corporate challenges. Instead, it had become the thing occupying her thoughts during the brief moments when her strategic brain wasn't processing market analysis and competitive positioning. He arrived at exactly 8 a.m., another point in his favor. Lydia valued punctuality as a sign of respect for other people's time. He was wearing jeans and a button-down shirt that had been carefully ironed, his hair still damp from a morning shower. Without the shapeless cleaning uniform, he looked different, younger maybe, but also more present, more real. "Mr. Reed?" she greeted him. "Coffee?" "Please?" His voice was steady this time, none of the panic from their first interaction. She poured 2 cups from the service she kept in her office, gestured to the sitting area rather than the formal desk. A small signal that this conversation was different, more equal. "You wanted to discuss your son," Lydia said, settling into one of the leather chairs. "Ethan," Caleb said. "His name is Ethan. He's 5. His mother isn't in the picture. That's not something I'm willing to discuss in detail, but it's relevant context. He's my priority, my only real priority. So before I even consider signing anything, I need to know exactly how this arrangement would affect him." Lydia appreciated the directness. "Tell me what you need." "I need guarantees that he won't be photographed without my explicit permission for each instance. I need control over what information about him becomes public. I need his school, his routine, his stability protected. I need—" Caleb paused, choosing words carefully. "I need to know that when this ends, when you've gotten what you need from this arrangement, he won't be collateral damage." "The education fund provision in the contract," Lydia said. "Did you see it?" "I saw it. That's not an answer to my question." "It's exactly an answer to your question," she replied. "Mr. Reed, I don't make long-term financial commitments to people I view as disposable. The education fund continues regardless of how or when our arrangement ends. That's not charity. That's insurance for you that I'm invested in outcomes beyond the 6-month term." Caleb studied her with those storm-gray eyes, and Lydia felt something shift in the air between them. He wasn't intimidated by her. He was assessing her, measuring her words against some internal standard of trustworthiness. She wasn't sure when the last time someone had done that was. "Why are you really doing this?" Caleb asked quietly. "The real reason. Not the reputation management explanation you gave yesterday. What's actually at stake for you?" Lydia considered deflecting, maintaining her professional distance, but something about the way he was looking at her, the way he'd centered his son's welfare above everything else, made her choose honesty instead. "My family is pressuring me toward a strategic marriage," she said. "Gregory Hartford, CEO of Hartford Industries. It would be a merger disguised as a marriage, combining our companies, consolidating market share, making both families wealthier. He's appropriate, connected, completely bloodless. And I've spent 33 years being told what's appropriate." So I'm your escape route, Caleb said. You're my placeholder, Lydia corrected. 6 months where I can claim to be seriously involved with someone, which gives me leverage to refuse the Hartford arrangement. By the time our situation naturally concludes, the merger window will have closed. Gregory will have moved on to another appropriate candidate. I'll have preserved my autonomy. And I get what? Money and a temporary upgrade in lifestyle before going back to invisible? You get security, Lydia said, leaning forward. Real security. The kind that means your son has health care, education funding, and a father who isn't working himself into the ground trying to make rent. You get 6 months to figure out what comes next, with a financial cushion that gives you actual choices. That's not nothing, Mr. Reed. Caleb, he said. If we're going to do this, you should probably use my first name. Caleb, she amended, and you should call me Lydia, at least when we're alone. He smiled, small and surprising. That feels weird. You're Lydia Monroe. You're basically corporate royalty. I'm a human being with a controlling family and a talent for making money, she said dryly. The royalty thing is marketing. They sat in silence for a moment, the morning light shifting across the office as the sun climbed higher. Lydia found herself noticing details, the calluses on Caleb's hands, evidence of work that went beyond pushing a cleaning cart. The way he held his coffee cup, fingers wrapped around it like he was trying to absorb its warmth. The tired shadows under his eyes that spoke of too many nights with insufficient sleep. I'll sign, Caleb said finally. But I need some additions to the contract. Specific language about Ethan's protection, veto power over any public appearances that involve him, and a clause that says if at any point this arrangement starts negatively affecting him, I can terminate immediately without penalty. Done, Lydia said. I'll have legal draft the amendments today. You'll have the revised contract by tomorrow. Just like that? Just like that. Caleb, I need you to understand something. This arrangement only works if we're both protected. If you don't trust the parameters, you'll second-guess every decision and it'll show. That's bad for both of us. So yes, just like that. He nodded slowly, set down his coffee cup. When does this start? Publicly? Next week. There's a charity gala Friday night, cancer research fundraiser, very high profile. We'll make our first appearance together there. But before that, we need to get you prepared. Prepared how? Lydia pulled out her phone, started typing notes. Wardrobe. You'll need appropriate clothing for these events. Social coaching. You'll be interacting with people who will judge you instantly. And while I don't care what they think, you'll be more comfortable if you understand their language. Background coordination with my PR team. So we have a consistent story. And we should probably spend some actual time together so we can at least approximate comfort in public. This sounds complicated, Caleb said, something almost like amusement in his voice. It's extremely complicated, Lydia agreed. Welcome to my world. The next 4 days were a crash course in a lifestyle Caleb had only ever observed from a distance. Marcus Chen appeared at his apartment Tuesday morning with a tailor and a stylist, both of whom descended on him with the focused intensity of people who viewed human bodies as canvases requiring correction. They measured, pinned, discussed his coloring and his build like he wasn't standing right there, and left with promises of a complete wardrobe delivered by Thursday. Wednesday brought Andrea Walsh, Lydia's head of PR, a sharp woman in her 40s who spoke in sound bites and treated their fake relationship like a military campaign requiring strategic planning. Your story is this, Andrea said, pacing Caleb's small living room while he tried not to feel embarrassed about the mismatched furniture and water stain on the ceiling. You met months ago. The tie incident was actually a moment between two people who'd been dancing around an attraction, and you've been quietly seeing each other since. Lydia doesn't discuss her personal life publicly, which explains why no one knew. You're private people. You value discretion. And people will believe that? Caleb asked skeptically. They'll believe what we give them to believe, Andrea replied. The key is confidence. You don't apologize for your background. You don't act like you're trying to fit in. You're confident in who you are, and Lydia is confident in choosing you. That's the story. I'm a janitor dating a billionaire CEO. How is that confident rather than delusional? You're a single father who works hard, values integrity, and caught the attention of an exceptional woman. You're not trying to be something you're not. That's the angle. Own it. Thursday brought the actual wardrobe delivery. 3 garment bags full of suits, shirts, ties, shoes that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Caleb hung them in his tiny closet next to his cleaning uniforms and felt the cognitive dissonance physically, like his life was splitting into 2 separate realities. Ethan was fascinated by the changes. "Daddy, why do you have fancy clothes? Are you going to a wedding?" "Something like that, buddy. Daddy's going to some work events that need dressy clothes." "Can I come?" "Not to these ones, baby, but I'll tell you all about them." Friday morning, Lydia texted, "The car will pick you up at 6 p.m. Bring Ethan to Mrs. Chen's early. You'll need time to prepare." Caleb spent the afternoon in a state of mounting anxiety. He'd faced a lot of hard things in his life. His ex-wife's disappearance with their son, the 2-year legal battle to get Ethan back, the grinding poverty of starting over with nothing. But somehow the idea of walking into a room full of wealthy strangers on Lydia Monroe's arm felt more terrifying than any of it. The car that arrived at 6 p.m. wasn't just a car. It was a town car with a driver who held the door and called him Mr. Reed, and somehow knew the route to Monroe Industries' executive garage without being told. Caleb sat in the leather interior, watching the city slide past, and wondered at what point he'd be able to stop feeling like an imposter. Lydia was waiting in her office, and the sight of her stopped Caleb in the doorway. He'd only ever seen her in business wear, severe suits, hair always perfectly controlled, makeup that enhanced rather than softened. Tonight, she wore a floor-length gown in deep emerald that seemed to shimmer when she moved, her hair swept up to expose the elegant line of her neck, diamond earrings catching the light. "You look terrified," she said, turning from the window. "That's actually perfect. Appropriate nervousness reads as genuine investment. I am genuinely invested in not humiliating you in front of your entire social circle," Caleb said. "Caleb." She crossed to him, reached up to adjust his tie. A callback to their first interaction, but deliberate this time, controlled. "You're going to be fine. Just stay close to me, follow my lead, and remember that most of these people are far less interesting than they believe themselves to be." "That's supposed to be reassuring?" "It's supposed to be accurate." A small smile. "Come on, our public awaits." The gala was held at the Grand Meridian, a hotel that Caleb had passed 100 times but never entered. The ballroom was decorated like something from a movie. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, orchestral music drifting from a stage where a string quartet played. People in formal wear clustered in conversation groups, servers circulating with champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres that Caleb couldn't identify. Every eye turned when they entered. Caleb felt the weight of collective scrutiny like a physical force, hundreds of strangers instantly cataloging his presence, judging his suit, his posture, his right to be standing next to Lydia Monroe. His instinct screamed to retreat, to find the nearest exit, to return to the safety of invisibility. Then Lydia's hand slid into his, her fingers lacing through his with easy confidence, and she leaned close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive. "Breathe," she murmured, echoing her words from that first hallway encounter. "And smile. You're supposed to be enjoying yourself." She guided him into the crowd, stopping at conversation clusters, introducing him with casual confidence. "This is Caleb Reed. Caleb, this is Jonathan Foster. He runs the Foster Foundation. And this is Catherine Morrison. She's with the Artistic Heritage Council." The conversations blurred together, polite inquiries about how they'd met, carefully neutral questions about his background, barely concealed assessment disguised as friendly interest. Caleb followed Andrea's coaching. Brief answers, confident delivery. No apologies for who he was or what he did. "How did you two meet?" Catherine Morrison asked, her smile sharp. "At work," Lydia said smoothly. "I've learned that the most interesting people are often the ones everyone overlooks." "How refreshingly democratic of you," Catherine replied, and the pause before democratic carried entire essays of judgment. Caleb felt Lydia's hand tighten fractionally in his, a signal. He smiled at Catherine with all the Southern politeness his grandmother had drilled into him. "Lydia's taught me that power has very little to do with title and everything to do with competence. It's been educational." Catherine's expression flickered, surprise maybe, that he could return conversational serve. She excused herself quickly after that, and Lydia's thumb traced a small circle against his palm. "Well played," she murmured. The evening progressed in waves of interaction and retreat. Caleb met what felt like hundreds of people, all of whom seemed to operate in a social language he was only partially fluent in. But gradually, he started to notice patterns. The way certain people angled for Lydia's attention, clearly wanting business favor disguised as social interaction. The way others positioned themselves as gatekeepers, trying to determine if he was worth their time. The complex hierarchy of who spoke to whom, who deferred to whom, who had actual power versus who simply had money. "You're observing," Lydia noted during a quiet moment at their assigned table, the salad course picked at but largely ignored. "I can see you cataloging behaviors." "Habit from my previous life," Caleb said, then caught himself. "Sorry, that's previous life?" She leaned closer, genuinely curious. "You've referenced that a couple times. The engineering degree you mentioned in passing, the work ethic that goes beyond janitorial duties. I'm starting to think there's a story there." Caleb took a sip of wine he didn't particularly like. "There's always a story. But it's not a first date conversation, even a fake first date." "Fair enough," Lydia said, but something in her eyes suggested she'd filed that information away for future reference. The evening's program included speeches about cancer research funding, genuinely moving testimonials from survivors, clinical presentations from researchers, the careful dance of extracting money from wealthy donors by making them feel both generous and important. Caleb watched Lydia during these presentations, noticed the way her expression shifted during the survivor stories, a brief crack in her controlled facade that suggested actual emotion rather than performed sympathy. "Did you lose someone?" he asked quietly, while applause covered their conversation. "To cancer?" Lydia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "My father, pancreatic. He had 6 months from diagnosis to death. I was 27, just starting to build the company. He made me promise I'd finish what he started." "I'm sorry," Caleb said, and meant it. "It was 6 years ago. I've learned to function with the loss." "That's not the same as healing from it." She turned to look at him fully, something shifting in her expression. "No, it's not." The moment broke when someone approached their table, Gregory Hartford himself, the man Lydia was supposedly using Caleb to avoid. He was exactly what Caleb expected: tall, conventionally handsome, expensive suit, the kind of polished confidence that came from never having to question whether he belonged anywhere. "Lydia," Gregory said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes, "I heard rumors you'd be bringing someone tonight." "Gregory Hartford." He extended his hand to Caleb with the careful courtesy people used when handling something potentially contaminated. "Caleb Reed," Caleb said, shaking firmly. "How fascinating." Lydia's always been one for unexpected choices. The pause before unexpected carried the same judgment as Catherine Morrison's earlier comment. "What is it you do, Caleb?" "Currently, I'm in facilities management at Monroe Industries." "Facilities management? How delightfully euphemistic." Gregory turned his attention back to Lydia, effectively dismissing Caleb from the conversation. "Lydia, we should discuss the Hartford proposal. Your mother mentioned you've been avoiding my calls." "I've been busy," Lydia said coolly, "and I've been quite clear about my position on merger discussions. Positions change, circumstances change. I'm sure Caleb understands the importance of remaining flexible in business negotiations. Don't you, Caleb?" It was a power play, forcing Caleb to either agree and undermine Lydia or disagree and seem controlling. Caleb smiled. "I understand that the best negotiations happen when both parties actually want the deal. Seems like you're working awful hard to convince someone who's already said no." Gregory's expression hardened. "Fascinating. Lydia, we'll talk next week. Enjoy your evening." He walked away, and Lydia exhaled slowly. "That was probably stupid," Caleb finished, "but he was being an asshole." "He was," Lydia agreed. "Thank you for defending my position. I thought that was the whole point of this arrangement, public solidarity." "It is, but you didn't have to do it with quite so much satisfaction," Caleb grinned. "I really didn't like that guy." "Neither do I," Lydia said, "which is why we're here." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of continued social performance. Caleb's feet hurt from the new dress shoes. His face ached from maintaining an appropriate expression, and his brain was exhausted from processing so many new social dynamics. But every time he started to flag, Lydia would do something small, a squeeze of his hand, a quiet comment about someone's ridiculous outfit, a shared moment of genuine amusement at the absurdity of their situation. By the time they left at midnight, Caleb felt like he'd run a marathon. The town car drove them back in silence, both of them too tired for conversation. When they pulled up to his building, shabby and small compared to the grandeur they'd just left, Lydia didn't comment on the contrast. "You did well tonight," she said instead. "Better than I expected, honestly." "Low bar?" "Realistic bar. This world is designed to make outsiders feel uncomfortable. You didn't let it." "I was terrified the entire time." "I know," Lydia said, "but you didn't show it. That's what matters." Caleb reached for the door handle, then paused. "Thank you. For the protections in the contract, for understanding about Ethan, for treating this like a real partnership instead of just a transaction." "We're both getting something we need," Lydia replied. "That's what makes it work." He nodded, stepped out of the car, and watched it pull away into the night. Mrs. Chen's apartment light was still on. She'd waited up, the way she always did when he worked late. Ethan would be asleep on her couch, probably clutching the stuffed dinosaur that went everywhere with him. Caleb climbed the stairs to retrieve his son, thinking about Lydia Monroe's hand in his, the way she'd defended him without making it obvious, the brief crack in her armor when she'd mentioned her father. He thought about Gregory Hartford's contempt, and Catherine Morrison's judgment, and the 100 other small tests he'd faced tonight. He thought about the fact that this was only the beginning, that he'd just signed up for 6 months of this performance, this careful dance between truth and fiction. Most of all, he thought about the moment when Lydia had adjusted his tie in the hallway of her office before they left, and how his breathing had stayed steady this time, even as something else in his chest had shifted, something he absolutely could not afford to feel. Mrs. Chen opened her door before he could knock. "How was the fancy party?" "Complicated," Caleb said, gathering Ethan into his arms. His son didn't wake, just settled against his shoulder with the absolute trust of children who know they're safe. "You look different," Mrs. Chen observed. "Expensive suit, fancy car, but same worried eyes." "Yeah," Caleb said quietly. "That about sums it up." He carried Ethan home through the midnight streets, feeling the weight of all the decisions he'd made, all the risks he'd taken, all the ways this could go wrong. But also feeling, for the first time in years, like maybe, just maybe, he'd found a path toward something better. Even if that path was paved with lies. Even if it meant standing beside someone he couldn't afford to want. Even if 6 months felt simultaneously too long and not nearly long enough. The following Monday morning, Caleb walked into Monroe Industries through the front entrance for the first time in 3 years. Not the service entrance where cleaning staff clocked in, not the loading dock where deliveries arrived, but the sweeping marble lobby with its waterfall wall and reception desk staffed by people whose job was to look impressive while directing visitors. He wore one of the new suits, carried a leather briefcase that Marcus had insisted was necessary, and felt every bit the imposter he knew himself to be. Security waved him through with barely a glance, his new ID badge already programmed into the system. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt longer than usual, each ascending number a reminder that he was crossing boundaries that weren't meant to be crossed. When the doors opened on 42, Sarah Mitchell from Executive Administration was waiting with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Reed, welcome. Ms. Monroe asked me to get you settled in your new office. If you'll follow me?" His new office. The words felt absurd. 2 weeks ago, he'd been emptying trash cans in these hallways. Now Sarah was leading him past conference rooms and corner offices to a space that, while modest by executive standards, was approximately 10 times larger than his entire apartment. "You'll be working as special assistant to the CEO," Sarah explained, her tone perfectly professional despite the curiosity radiating from her like heat. "Your responsibilities will include project coordination, stakeholder liaison, and executive support as Ms. Monroe requires. Marcus Chen will provide detailed orientation this afternoon." "Thank you," Caleb managed, stepping into the office and trying not to show how overwhelmed he felt. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, a desk that looked like it cost more than his car, actual art on the walls. Ms. Monroe wanted me to remind you that the executive team meeting is at 10, Sarah added. You'll be attending to observe company operations. Conference room A. After she left, Caleb stood in the center of his new office and had the surreal thought that if he looked down, he might see his former self pushing a cleaning cart 12 floors below. The disconnect was so profound it was almost funny. Almost. His phone buzzed. Lydia. Surviving your first morning as gainfully employed in a job that doesn't involve industrial cleaning solutions? He typed back, Barely. This office has more square footage than my apartment. Get used to it. Perception is reality in this building. You're my partner now. That comes with certain physical manifestations of status. Your partner in a fake relationship. A distinction that matters to us but to no one else. How's Ethan adjusting to the new schedule? The question surprised him. They'd discussed Ethan extensively in contract negotiations, but Lydia asking about his daily welfare felt personal rather than professional. He thinks it's cool that Daddy has a fancy job. Mrs. Chen is handling afternoon pickup until I figure out my actual hours here. We should discuss introducing him to me properly. If we're going to maintain this long term, he needs to understand who I am in context. I know, I've been trying to figure out how to explain to a 5-year-old that Daddy's girlfriend is actually his boss, and it's complicated. May I suggest we don't use the word boss? It reinforces a power dynamic that I'd rather minimize in his perception. Caleb stared at that message, something loosening in his chest. She was thinking about Ethan's emotional well-being, not just the optics of their arrangement. Thank you for considering that. 10 a.m., conference room A. Don't be late. The executive team meeting was an exercise in controlled chaos disguised as professional efficiency. 12 people around a massive table, each commanding their own division of Monroe Industries' empire, all speaking in a shorthand of acronyms and internal references that Caleb only partially understood. Lydia ran the meeting with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra, directing conversation, cutting off tangents, pushing decisions forward with relentless momentum. Caleb sat beside her, taking notes on a tablet he was still learning to navigate, and tried to absorb the sheer complexity of what Lydia managed daily. Production delays in the Atlanta facility, regulatory challenges in the EU market, competitive pressure from a Singapore-based rival, budget allocation disputes between R&D and marketing. Every issue carried million-dollar implications, and Lydia processed them with the calm efficiency of someone solving simple math problems. Caleb, you're quiet, Marcus Chen said during a brief lull. Thoughts on the distribution restructuring proposal? Every eye turned to him, and Caleb felt his throat go dry. He'd been following the discussion about consolidating regional warehouses, but offering opinions on corporate strategy when he'd been cleaning these offices 2 weeks ago felt presumptuous at best. I think, he said slowly, choosing words carefully, that the efficiency gains you're projecting assume perfect information flow between consolidated points. But most distribution problems I've seen come from communication breakdowns, not distance. If you're centralizing without upgrading your information systems, you might just be creating bigger, more expensive problems. Silence. Then Lydia smiled, small and approving. Exactly my concern. Marcus, I want its assessment of our distribution communication infrastructure before we move forward with consolidation. Next item. After the meeting, as people filed out, Marcus caught Caleb's arm. That was good instinct. Where'd you learn distribution logistics? Previous life? Caleb said, the same deflection he'd used with Lydia at the gala. Different industry. Marcus studied him with open curiosity. You know everyone's trying to figure you out, right? Mysterious guy who came out of nowhere, caught Lydia Monroe's attention, clearly has some background beyond janitorial work. The speculation is intense. Let them speculate, Caleb replied, more confident than he felt. I'm not here to satisfy curiosity. No, you're here because Lydia wants you here, which is the only thing that matters in this building. Marcus grinned. For what it's worth, you handled that meeting well. Most new people are too intimidated to speak up. You jumped in with actual insight. Because I have nothing to lose, Caleb thought, but didn't say. Because this entire situation is temporary, so I might as well be useful while it lasts. The rest of the week fell into a rhythm that felt simultaneously natural and completely surreal. Mornings with Ethan, breakfast, getting him ready for school, drop off at kindergarten with the other parents who all seemed to know each other in ways Caleb didn't. Days at Monroe Industries learning the actual operations of the company, sitting in meetings, coordinating projects that he was surprised to discover he had genuine aptitude for. Evenings back to reality, picking up Ethan, dinner, bedtime routines, the small apartment that stood in stark contrast to his daytime environment. And then there were the public appearances with Lydia. A gallery opening on Wednesday where they stood close while pretending to appreciate abstract art that neither of them understood. A business dinner Thursday with potential investors where Caleb played the role of supportive partner, asking intelligent questions and letting Lydia shine. Each event was a performance, carefully choreographed, but the strangest part was how natural it was starting to feel. "You're getting better at this," Lydia observed Friday evening, in the car between a ribbon-cutting ceremony and a cocktail reception. They had 20 minutes of privacy, and both of them had simultaneously kicked off their shoes, a small rebellion against the demands of constant performance. Better at what? Pretending? Better at reading the room? Understanding the dynamics? You knew that investor at dinner was skeptical about our AI integration, and you asked exactly the right question to let me address his concerns without seeming defensive. "I was an engineer in my previous life," Caleb said, the admission slipping out before he could stop it. "Process optimization, actually. I learned to read what people were really worried about versus what they said they were worried about." Lydia turned to face him fully, the passing streetlights creating patterns across her face. "Why are you working as a janitor with an engineering degree? Why are you running a company you inherited instead of building something of your own?" "Touché," she smiled. "We both have our complicated histories. Mine involves a custody battle that nearly destroyed me financially and emotionally. Yours involves expectations and family legacy. They're not equivalent." "No," Lydia agreed quietly. "They're not. But they're both prisons of a sort, aren't they? Built from circumstances we didn't entirely choose." Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the perfect makeup and designer dress to something raw underneath. "Is that what this arrangement is for you? A way out of your prison? Isn't that what it is for you?" They held each other's gaze, the air in the car suddenly charged with something neither of them wanted to name. Then Lydia's phone buzzed, breaking the moment, and they both reached for their shoes, preparing for the next performance. The cocktail reception was at a rooftop bar downtown, some tech startup's product launch that Lydia had been invited to as a potential investor. The space was crowded with young entrepreneurs in expensive casual wear, venture capitalists in their uniform of fleece vests and designer jeans, the whole ecosystem of innovation and money that powered the city's economy. Caleb had just retrieved drinks when he heard a voice that made his blood freeze. "Well, well, Caleb Reed. Didn't expect to see you at an event like this." He turned to find James Hendrickson, former colleague from his engineering days, the same smug smile he remembered from 5 years ago. James looked successful, tailored suit, confident posture, the ease of someone whose life had followed the expected trajectory. "James?" Caleb said neutrally. "It's been a while." 5 years, I think. Last I heard, you dropped off the map completely, gave up the engineering career for what?" James's eyes swept over Caleb's expensive suit, the drink in his hand, clearly trying to reconcile the man he remembered with the context he was seeing. "What are you doing now?" "Working for Monroe Industries," Caleb said carefully. "In what capacity?" James leaned in, voice dropping conspiratorially. "Because I heard the wildest rumor that you were dating Lydia Monroe herself. I told people that was insane. You barely made it through one marriage. Why would a woman like that—" "James." Lydia appeared at Caleb's side with the precision of someone who'd been monitoring the situation from across the room. She slid her hand into Caleb's with easy possession. "I see you've met my partner. How do you two know each other?" The word partner hung in the air, deliberately ambiguous, professional or personal or both. James's expression cycled through surprise, disbelief, and something that looked uncomfortably like envy. "We worked together years ago, before Caleb had his—" James paused, clearly trying to decide how much to reveal. "Before his personal situation complicated things." "I'm familiar with Caleb's personal situation," Lydia said coolly. His son is delightful. We had breakfast together this morning, actually. Ethan has strong opinions about pancake shapes. It was a lie, but a strategic one, establishing intimacy and acceptance. Caleb felt something warm spread through his chest at how naturally she defended not just him, but Ethan, claiming them both as worthy of her time. I didn't realize you'd... James floundered. That's great. Really great. Caleb, we should catch up sometime, talk about the old days. I don't think about the old days much, Caleb said. I'm pretty focused on the present. After James retreated, Lydia's hand remained in his. Old colleague or old problem? Both. He knows too much about my history. If he starts talking, let him talk. Caleb, the beautiful thing about my position is that I can make any story I want believable through sheer force of will and strategic relationships. If James Hendrickson spreads rumors about your past, they'll be dismissed as jealousy from a former colleague who couldn't handle your success. You don't even know what my past involves. I know you're a good father. I know you work harder than anyone I've met. I know you walked away from something to protect your son. The rest is details. She squeezed his hand. Trust me to handle this. And the terrifying thing was, he did trust her. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks, Lydia Monroe had gone from distant CEO to someone he relied on, someone whose judgment he trusted, someone who made him feel less alone in a way he hadn't felt since before his marriage imploded. That realization scared him more than any of James Hendrickson's potential revelations. The weekend brought their first real test of the arrangement's personal boundaries. Lydia had invited them to her family's estate for Sunday brunch, a command performance disguised as a casual meal. Caleb had resisted until she'd explained the strategic necessity. My mother is going to push until she understands the situation is real, Lydia had said. One brunch, you and Ethan, showing that you're integrated into my life. It stops the questions. So Sunday morning found Caleb driving his beat-up Honda through neighborhoods that got progressively more expensive, Ethan chattering in the back seat about whether Lydia's house would have a pool, until they reached gates that required a security code and a driveway that seemed to go on forever. Daddy, this isn't a house, Ethan breathed as the Monroe estate came into view. This is a castle. It's just a big house, buddy. Remember what we talked about? Be polite, use your manners, and if you need me, I'm right there. Inside, Patricia Monroe waited with the posture of someone accustomed to being obeyed and the smile of someone who'd learned to disguise judgment as hospitality. She was Lydia 30 years older, the same bone structure and commanding presence, but where Lydia had warmth beneath the control, Patricia seemed to have only more control. Caleb, how lovely to finally meet you properly. Patricia's handshake was brief, her attention immediately shifting to Ethan. And this must be Ethan. Lydia's told me so much about you. That was a lie. Lydia had mentioned explicitly that she shared minimal personal information with her mother, but Ethan didn't know that. He stepped forward with 5-year-old bravery and extended his hand. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Monroe. You have a really big house. Patricia's laugh was genuine, surprising both Caleb and Lydia, who'd just appeared in the doorway. I do have a big house. Would you like to see the gardens while the adults talk business? Can I, Daddy? Ethan's eyes were wide with excitement. Caleb looked to Lydia, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Sure, buddy. Stay where Mrs. Monroe can see you. After Patricia and Ethan disappeared toward the French doors leading outside, Lydia crossed to Caleb with 2 mimosas. She's on her best behavior. That won't last. How long do we have? Approximately 10 minutes before she starts the interrogation. Lydia sipped her drink. Thank you for bringing him. I know this is a lot. He thinks you're a princess who lives in a castle. You're officially his favorite person. I'm not sure that's healthy. I'm nobody's favorite person. You're wrong about that, Caleb said quietly, and watched something flicker across her face before she turned away. Brunch was served on a terrace overlooking gardens that probably required a full-time staff. Patricia had invited several other guests, a cousin who worked in private equity, a family friend who sat on the board of directors, Lydia's younger brother Marcus, who worked in the company's European division. All of them studied Caleb with varying degrees of curiosity while maintaining perfect social courtesy. So Caleb, the cousin, Richard something, said over smoked salmon and asparagus, Lydia mentioned you're working as her special assistant, That's quite a career trajectory. What did you do before Monroe Industries? Here it was, the question he'd been dreading. Caleb felt Lydia's hand find his knee under the table, a small gesture of support. Engineering, process optimization for manufacturing systems. I took time away from the field to focus on raising my son as a single parent. When the opportunity at Monroe Industries came up, it seemed like the right time to return to professional work. Engineering, Patricia repeated, as if tasting the word. That's respectable. Though I have to say, Caleb, when Lydia told me she was seeing someone seriously, I expected someone more established in their career. Mother, Lydia's voice carried warning. I'm simply being honest, darling. The Hartford merger would have positioned Monroe Industries for unprecedented growth. Gregory is a tax strategy disguised as a person, Lydia interrupted. And we're not discussing the Hartford merger at Sunday brunch. We're discussing your future, Patricia countered, which affects this entire family's future. I think we have a right to understand what exactly you see in this arrangement. The word arrangement hit like a physical blow. Caleb started to stand, ready to remove himself and Ethan from a situation that was deteriorating rapidly, but Lydia's hand tightened on his knee. What I see, Lydia said, her voice diamond hard, is a man who puts his child before his ego, who rebuilt his life from nothing because it was necessary. Who's smarter than half the executives I employ and humble enough to keep learning? What I see is someone who makes me want to be better than the legacy I inherited. If that's not enough for you, Mother, then I suppose we'll be having very limited family interactions going forward. Silence fell over the table. Patricia's expression was unreadable, but something in her posture had shifted. She studied Lydia for a long moment, then turned her attention to Caleb. You make my daughter happy? It was a simple question, but loaded with complexity, because he didn't make Lydia happy. This was an arrangement, a strategic partnership, a mutual escape plan. Except when he looked at Lydia now, saw the fierce defensiveness in her eyes. The way she'd claimed him in front of her entire family, he wasn't entirely sure that was still true. I try to, Caleb said honestly. Every day. Patricia nodded slowly. Then I suppose I should get to know you better. Tell me about your son. Lydia says he likes dinosaurs? The conversation shifted after that, becoming genuinely pleasant. Ethan returned from the gardens with stories about koi fish and a peacock that had displayed its feathers. Patricia was surprisingly good with him, asking questions that actually listened to the answers, and by the time they left 2 hours later, Caleb felt like maybe they'd survived the test. In the car, Ethan fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from excitement. Caleb drove in silence for several miles before Lydia spoke. Thank you for not walking out when my mother was being impossible. She was protecting you. I understand that impulse. She was being a snob. She was being a mother who worries her daughter is making a mistake. Given that this entire situation is built on deception, she's not entirely wrong to be concerned. Lydia was quiet for a long moment. What you said, about me making you want to be better, did you mean that or was it performance? Caleb kept his eyes on the road, aware of Ethan sleeping in the back seat, aware of how dangerous honesty could be. I meant it. You're not who I thought you'd be. Who did you think I'd be? Cold, calculating, someone who saw people as chess pieces. But you asked about Ethan's adjustment to the new schedule. You defended him to your mother before defending yourself. You structured our contract to protect him before protecting your interests. That's not chess pieces. That's caring about people. Don't make me into something I'm not, Caleb. I'm still using you to avoid an unwanted marriage. That's manipulation regardless of how I dress it up. And I'm using you to secure my son's future. We're both getting what we need. That was the deal. Is that still all this is? Lydia asked quietly. A deal? Caleb pulled up to her building, a different world from his own neighborhood, all glass and steel and security gates. He should say yes, should maintain the boundaries that kept this professional, temporary, safe. I don't know anymore, he admitted instead. That probably makes me an idiot. Lydia smiled, sad and small. If you're an idiot, then we both are. See you tomorrow, Caleb. She got out of the car and Caleb watched her disappear into her building before driving home through the late afternoon traffic. In the back seat, Ethan stirred, half awake. Daddy? I like Lydia. She's nice. Yeah, buddy, she is.
Are you going to marry her?
The question was so innocent, so logical from a 5-year-old's perspective. Adults who spent time together got married. That was how the world worked. That Caleb felt his chest tighten. It's complicated, Ethan. That's what grown-ups say when they don't want to explain things. You're too smart for your own good, you know that? That's what Mrs. Chen says, but she also gives me cookies, so I think she likes that I'm smart. Caleb pulled into their building's parking lot, gathered his son into his arms even though Ethan was really too big to be carried anymore. I love you, buddy, more than anything in the world. I love you too, Daddy. Can we have pizza for dinner? And just like that, they were back to normal life. The world of corporate events and family estates feeling like something from a dream. Except it wasn't a dream anymore. It was his reality, at least for the next 5.5 months. The question was whether he could survive that reality with his heart intact. The following week brought new challenges as the arrangement became more public and more complicated. A business magazine wanted to do a profile on Lydia, and their PR team saw the relationship angle as perfect humanizing content. Andrea scheduled the interview for Thursday afternoon, with a photographer coming to capture candid moments of them working together. I need you to understand, Andrea told Caleb during the prep session Wednesday, that this interview is about selling a narrative. Lydia Monroe, not just a brilliant CEO, but a complete person with a relationship and personal life. They're going to ask invasive questions. Your job is to be charming and protective without being controlling. How exactly do I manage that balance? Deflect personal questions back to professional admiration. When they ask how you met, focus on Lydia's qualities that attracted you. When they ask about future plans, be vague but optimistic. When they ask about the class difference, be confident in your worth without being defensive. This is exhausting. This is the job. Welcome to life as a public figure. The interview itself was somehow both better and worse than Caleb expected. The journalist, a sharp woman named Rebecca Chen, asked questions that felt designed to find cracks in their story. How did they navigate power dynamics? What did his son think of the relationship? Did Caleb ever feel intimidated by Lydia's success? I'd be lying if I said there wasn't an adjustment period, Caleb said, choosing honesty where he could. But Lydia has a way of making you feel like your contributions matter regardless of your title. She listens. That's rarer than you'd think in this world. And you, Miss Monroe? Rebecca turned to Lydia. What does Caleb bring to your life that you couldn't find in more conventional relationship options? Caleb sees me as a person, not a position, Lydia replied. He challenges me when I'm wrong, supports me when I'm right, and reminds me that success means nothing if you're isolated in it. That's not something I could find in conventional options, as you put it. The photographer posed them by the office windows, Lydia's hand on Caleb's shoulder, while they both looked at a tablet, the picture of professional partnership and personal connection. Looking at the image on the camera's preview screen, Caleb had the disorienting thought that they looked real, like an actual couple, like people who belonged together. Beautiful, the photographer declared. The chemistry really comes through. After they left, Lydia sank into her desk chair with visible exhaustion. I hate those interviews. Every personal question feels like an invasion. You were good at it, though. Natural. Years of practice at performing whatever version of myself people need to see. She looked up at him, something vulnerable in her expression. Do you ever get tired of it? The constant performance? Every single day, Caleb admitted. But then I remember why I'm doing it, and it gets easier. And why are you doing it, Caleb? Really? Beyond the money and the security, what's the thing that makes all of this worth it? He could have deflected. Should have deflected. But the afternoon light was slanting through the windows, and Lydia looked so tired, so human, that he chose truth instead. Because for the first time in 5 years, I feel like I'm moving forward instead of just surviving. Because Ethan has stability and options I couldn't give him before. And because... He stopped, the next words too dangerous to say. Because what? Lydia pressed, standing up, crossing to where he stood by the window. Because spending time with you has stopped feeling like an obligation and started feeling like something I look forward to. Which wasn't part of the deal and probably makes everything more complicated, but it's true. They stood close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her eyes, close enough that he could feel her breath hitch. The air between them felt charged, heavy with possibility and danger. "Caleb," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, "we can't. I know. I know this is temporary and professional and carefully bounded. I know you're using me to avoid Gregory Hartford, and I'm using you to build a future for my son. I know all of that. But it doesn't change the fact that somewhere in the last 3 weeks, this stopped being just an arrangement for me." Lydia closed her eyes, her hands clenching at her sides. When she opened them again, there was pain there alongside something that looked terrifyingly like hope. "This is a mistake," she said. Probably. "We have 4.5 months left on the contract. If we complicate it with actual feelings, someone gets hurt." "Too late," Caleb said softly. "I'm already complicated." She reached up, her hand trembling slightly, and touched his face with a gentleness that broke something open in his chest. "I built my entire life on control, on knowing exactly what I wanted and how to get it. You weren't supposed to be part of that equation." "I know. But somehow you are anyway," she whispered, and then she was kissing him. It wasn't like the performative gestures they'd shared at public events, the careful hand-holding, the staged proximity, the appropriate distance. This was real and desperate and terrifying in its intensity. Caleb's hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and Lydia made a sound that was half surrender, half relief, like she'd been holding her breath for weeks and could finally exhale. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Lydia rested her forehead against his. "This is such a bad idea." "The worst," Caleb agreed. "We should maintain professional boundaries. Keep this strictly business for the remaining contract term." "Absolutely we should. So we're in agreement that this can't happen again." But even as she said it, her hands were still tangled in his shirt, her body still pressed against his. "Complete agreement," Caleb murmured against her hair, making no move to step away. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the fading afternoon light, both knowing they'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, both terrified and exhilarated by what that meant. Lydia's phone buzzed, shattering the moment. She stepped back reluctantly, smoothing her clothes, rebuilding her professional armor with visible effort. "I have a board call in 10 minutes, she said, her voice not quite steady. This conversation isn't finished, but it needs to be paused." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because I'm not sure I do. I'm not sure of anything right now, except that everything just got infinitely more complicated." "Lydia," Caleb said, catching her hand before she could retreat completely, "whatever this is, whatever it becomes, I'm not going to hurt you. I need you to know that." She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, and something in her expression cracked. "What if I hurt you? What if that's inevitable in this situation?" "Then we deal with it when it happens. But right now, in this moment, I don't regret what just happened. Do you?" "No," she admitted quietly. "I don't. And that terrifies me more than anything." She pulled her hand free gently and walked to her desk, already shifting back into CEO mode, preparing for the board call that wouldn't wait. Caleb watched her transform, watched her rebuild the walls that he'd somehow managed to breach, and wondered what exactly they'd just started. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. "Ethan asking when you'll be home. Should I give him dinner?" Reality crashed back in, his son waiting. His actual life outside of this office, outside of this complicated thing growing between him and Lydia. He had to figure out how to balance all of it. The fake relationship that was becoming real, the professional role he was still learning, the father role that had to come first. "I need to go," he told Lydia. "Ethan's waiting." She nodded without looking up from her computer. "We'll talk tomorrow, figure out what this means." "Okay." "Caleb?" She did look up then. "Thank you for being honest, even when it's complicated." "Same to you." He left her office, rode the elevator down to the parking garage, and sat in his car for 5 full minutes before starting the engine. His hands were shaking, his heart was racing, and despite knowing this was dangerous, despite knowing they'd just made everything infinitely more difficult, he couldn't stop smiling, because Lydia Monroe had kissed him, had chosen him, had admitted that this thing between them was real. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Caleb Reed felt like maybe, just maybe, he deserved something good. Even if that good thing came with an expiration date, even if it meant risking everything he'd worked so hard to build, even if it meant his heart was now completely, terrifyingly, wonderfully on the line. The dinner with Ethan that night felt different, charged with an energy that Caleb couldn't quite contain. His son noticed immediately the way 5-year-olds could sense shifts in their parents' emotional weather without understanding the meteorology behind it. "You're smiling a lot, Daddy," Ethan observed around a mouthful of chicken nuggets. "Did something good happen at work?" "Maybe," Caleb said, unable to stop the grin that kept threatening to break across his face. "I had a good day, that's all." "Was Lydia there?" The question was innocent, but it landed like a depth charge in Caleb's chest. "She's always there, buddy. She's my boss." "But she's also your girlfriend, right? Like how Tommy's mom has a boyfriend who comes to dinner sometimes?" Caleb set down his fork, recognizing the conversation he'd been avoiding. "It's a little more complicated than that. You keep saying things are complicated. I think you just don't want to explain." You're too smart, you know that?" Caleb reached across the table to ruffle Ethan's hair. "Yeah, Lydia's important to me, but grown-up relationships are different than kid friendships. There's more stuff to figure out." "Do you love her?" The question hung in the air between them, and Caleb found he didn't have an easy answer. Did he love Lydia Monroe? He'd known her for barely a month. Their entire relationship was built on a contractual foundation of mutual benefit and strategic positioning. Love didn't factor into business arrangements, even when those arrangements included kissing that made his entire world tilt sideways. "I care about her," he said carefully. "A lot. Is that enough of an answer for now?" Ethan considered this with the seriousness of a much older person. "I guess, but Daddy? If you do love her, you should tell her. Mrs. Chen says people always regret the things they don't say more than the things they do." "Mrs. Chen is very wise. She also gives me extra cookies when you work late, so she's basically the best." After Ethan was in bed, Caleb sat on the couch in the dark apartment and tried to process the past 12 hours. He'd crossed a line with Lydia that couldn't be uncrossed, had admitted feelings that violated every boundary they'd established, had kissed her like a drowning man finding air, and instead of feeling guilty or worried about the complications, he felt alive in a way he hadn't since before his marriage collapsed. His phone buzzed with a text from Lydia. "Can't sleep. Keep replaying this afternoon. We need to talk about what happens next." He typed back, "Define what happens next. Do we pretend it didn't happen? Do we acknowledge it and maintain distance? Do we—" I don't know what the right answer is here. Maybe there isn't a right answer. Maybe we just figure it out as we go. That's terrifying. I don't do figure it out as we go. I plan. I strategize. I control variables. Well, how's that working out for you so far? There was a long pause before her response came through. "Point taken. Caleb, I don't know how to do this, the real version, I mean. The fake relationship I can manage. But actual feelings? I'm completely out of my depth. Join the club. I haven't dated anyone since my divorce. Haven't wanted to. Haven't had the emotional bandwidth with Ethan needing so much. But somehow you got past all of that. Is that a good thing or a disaster waiting to happen? Can it be both?" Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Come over tomorrow night, after Ethan's asleep. We need to have this conversation face to face, not through text messages at midnight." Caleb stared at that message, his heart rate accelerating. Going to Lydia's apartment after hours, having a conversation about feelings and complications and what came next, that felt like stepping off a cliff with no certainty of landing safely. "Okay," he typed. "What time?" 9. I'll send you the address." "And Caleb? Whatever we decide tomorrow, I need you to know that this afternoon wasn't a mistake for me. Complicated, yes. Mistake, no." He fell asleep with his phone in his hand, that message still glowing on the screen, and dreamed of kissing Lydia Monroe in an office that transformed into something vast and impossible, where gravity worked differently and falling felt like flying. The next day at work was an exercise in restraint. They had a meeting about the Tecton acquisition at 10, a lunch with potential partners at noon, and an afternoon of back-to-back calls that left no room for personal conversation. But every time their eyes met across the conference table, every time Lydia's hand accidentally brushed his while reaching for documents, the air seemed to compress, heavy with unspoken words. Marcus noticed. "You two are being weird today," he said during a brief break between calls. "Weirder than usual, I mean. Everything okay?" "Fine," Caleb said too quickly. "Just tired. Ethan had a nightmare last night, didn't sleep well." It wasn't technically a lie. Ethan had woken up once asking for water, but the omission felt substantial. He was getting too good at these half-truths, these careful edits of reality that protected the complicated truth underneath. By the time 9 p.m. rolled around, Caleb had worked himself into a state of anxious anticipation that felt ridiculous for a 31-year-old man. He'd dropped Ethan at Mrs. Chen's with a vague explanation about a work emergency, changed his shirt twice, and spent the entire drive to Lydia's building wondering if he was making a catastrophic mistake. Her apartment was on the top floor of a building that required both a key card and a concierge's approval to access. The elevator opened directly into her foyer, and Caleb stepped into a space that was somehow exactly what he expected, and nothing like he'd imagined. Expensive, yes. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture, art that probably cost more than his annual salary, but also lived in. Books stacked on the coffee table, a throw blanket draped carelessly over the couch, coffee cups in the sink visible through the open kitchen doorway. Lydia appeared from a hallway, wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair down for the first time he'd ever seen outside of that first gala. She looked younger without the armor of professional wear, more vulnerable, and Caleb felt something in his chest constrict. "Hi," she said, and he could hear the nervousness underneath the word. "Hi yourself." They stood in her foyer for a long moment, neither quite sure how to bridge the gap between professional colleagues and whatever they were becoming. Finally, Lydia gestured toward the living room. "Wine? I have a very good Pinot Noir that I've been saving for a reason I couldn't articulate. This feels like reason enough." "Wine sounds good." She poured 2 glasses while Caleb gravitated toward the windows, looking out at the city sprawled below them. From this height, the streets he'd driven were barely visible, reduced to lines of light in the darkness. The disconnect felt symbolic somehow, the distance between where he'd come from and where he was standing now. "I've been thinking about what you said," Lydia began, handing him a glass and settling onto the couch. "About this stopping being just an arrangement, and I realized I've been lying to myself for at least 2 weeks. Caleb sat beside her, careful to maintain some distance. "Lying about what?" "About why I kept finding excuses to have you in meetings you didn't need to attend. About why I restructured your office location to be closer to mine when the logical choice would have been the 3rd floor near Marcus. About why every time my mother calls to push the Gregory Hartford agenda, my first thought is you, not strategy." She looked down at her wine glass. "I told myself it was because you're useful, competent, good at reading situations, and you are those things. But that's not why I want you around." "Why do you want me around?" "Because you make me feel less alone," she said quietly. "Because you see me as Lydia, not as the Monroe legacy or the CEO or the strategic asset. Because when you look at me, I feel like I'm actually visible instead of just being whatever version of myself people need." She finally met his eyes. "Because somewhere between adjusting your tie in that hallway and sitting here tonight, I started falling for you, and I have no idea what to do with that." Caleb set down his wine glass before he could drop it. "Lydia—" "Let me finish," she interrupted, "because I need to say this while I still have the courage. I know this complicates everything. I know we have 4 months left on a contract that specifies this is temporary and professional. I know you have a son to think about, and I have a company to run, and there are approximately 1,000 reasons why this is a terrible idea. But I'm tired of doing the sensible thing. I'm tired of choosing strategy over what I actually want. And what I want is you. Really, you. Not the performance version, not the arrangement, you." The vulnerability in her voice, the way her hands trembled slightly around her wine glass, the absolute terror and hope mixed in her expression, it all combined to break down whatever remaining walls Caleb had been maintaining. "I'm not good at this," he said, setting down his own glass and taking her hands. "I failed spectacularly at marriage. I'm a single father with a complicated history and not much to offer someone like you. I work for you, which makes this a power dynamic nightmare. I live in a one-bedroom apartment where I sleep on the couch. I drive a car that's held together by hope and duct tape. On paper, I'm probably the worst choice you could make. I don't care about paper, Lydia said fiercely. I'm not done. He squeezed her hands gently. But despite all of that, despite knowing this could blow up in both our faces, I want this too. I want you. The real version who gets frustrated when board members don't understand her vision, who remembered to ask about Ethan's adjustment, who defended me to your mother before defending yourself, who kisses me like the world is ending and we're the only two people who can save it. That's terrifyingly poetic for someone who claims to be bad at this, Lydia said, but she was smiling through what looked like the beginning of tears. I've had a lot of time to think about what I'd say if I ever got the chance. And what else were you going to say? Caleb pulled her closer until there was no distance left between them. That I'm scared out of my mind. That this could hurt Ethan if it goes wrong. That I don't know how to balance being your employee and being your actual partner. That 4 months feels both too long and nowhere near enough time. But that despite all of that, I'd rather try and fail than not try at all. That's a terrible risk assessment, Lydia whispered, her hands coming up to frame his face. Then we're both terrible at risk assessment. This kiss was different from the one in her office. Slower, deeper, weighted with meaning rather than just desire. It felt like a promise and a question and an answer all at once. Lydia's fingers threaded through his hair and Caleb pulled her into his lap, both of them trying to get closer, to eliminate every molecule of space between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lydia rested her forehead against his. We should set some ground rules. Figure out how to do this without imploding everything. Okay, what kind of rules? At work, we maintain professional boundaries. I can't show favoritism, and you can't be seen as getting special treatment. The company has to come first during business hours. Agreed. What else? Ethan's welfare is paramount. If at any point this situation becomes harmful to him, we step back and reassess, no matter how we feel about each other. Absolutely. That's non-negotiable for me. We're honest with each other, even when it's hard, even when it complicates things. No more performing, at least when we're alone. I can do that. Caleb brushed a strand of hair back from her face. What about the contract? The 6-month timeline. Lydia's expression grew serious. We honor it. The business arrangement continues as planned. Public appearances. The strategy to avoid Gregory Hartford, all of it. But we acknowledge that what's happening between us is separate from that. Real instead of performed. So we're running 2 parallel relationships? The fake public one and the real private one? Unless you have a better idea. I really don't. Caleb kissed her again, soft and brief. This is insane, you know that, right? We're making everything infinitely more complicated. I know, but I'd rather have complicated and real than simple and empty. She shifted in his lap, getting more comfortable. Tell me about Ethan, the real story. You keep deflecting, but if we're doing this, really doing this, I need to know what I'm stepping into. Caleb's entire body tensed. He'd avoided this conversation for weeks, deflecting questions, changing subjects, maintaining the careful editing of his history that kept the painful parts hidden. But Lydia was right. If they were going to try making this real, she deserved to know the truth. His mother left when he was 3, Caleb began, the words feeling like broken glass in his throat. Just disappeared one day. Took him with her, actually. Vanished across state lines, changed her name, went completely off the grid. It took me 8 months to even find them, and then another 16 months of legal battles to get him back. Lydia's hands tightened on his shoulders. Caleb, I had no idea. Nobody does. It's not exactly something I advertise. The custody fight bankrupted me. I lost my job because I couldn't focus, couldn't show up consistently. Lost our house, lost everything, really, except the determination to get my son back. He looked away, unable to meet her eyes while reliving this. When I finally did, when the judge granted me full custody, Ethan was different. Scared. He had nightmares for months. Didn't trust that I wouldn't disappear too. I had to rebuild his entire sense of security from nothing. That's why you took the janitorial job, Lydia said, understanding dawning. why you needed to be invisible. I needed stability more than I needed career advancement. The job had benefits, consistent hours, no questions asked about my background. I could pick up Ethan from school, be present, prove to him that I wasn't going anywhere. The money was terrible, and the work was mindless, but it gave me what mattered, time with my son, and the safety of not being noticed. And then I noticed you, Lydia said quietly, and destroyed that safety. No. Caleb finally met her eyes. You gave me something different. A way to provide for Ethan that didn't require sacrificing presence, the arrangement, the money, the stability. It's more than I could have built on my own in years. You didn't destroy anything. You offered a path forward. But now I'm asking you to risk that stability by making this real, by introducing actual feelings into something that was supposed to be purely transactional. Yeah, you are. And I'm choosing to take that risk. Because Ethan deserves to see his father actually living, not just surviving. Because I deserve more than just going through motions. And because you're worth the risk. Lydia pulled him into a kiss that tasted like wine and tears and relief. And they stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the dim light of her apartment while the city hummed below them. Eventually, they moved to the couch properly, Lydia tucked against Caleb's side, both of them unwilling to give up the physical contact now that they'd allowed themselves to have it. I should go, Caleb said around 11, though he made no move to actually leave. Mrs. Chen will wonder why the work emergency is taking so long. Or you could stay, Lydia said quietly. Not for... we don't have to. I just don't want you to leave yet. I'd like to stay, but I need to be home before Ethan wakes up. He's had enough instability in his life. I can't add to that by not being there in the morning. I understand. That's one of the things She stopped herself, and Caleb felt her tense against him. One of the things you what? One of the things I love about you, she finished, so quietly he almost missed it. The way you put him first, always, without question. The word love hung between them, enormous and terrifying and wonderful. Caleb knew he should probably deflect, slow things down, maintain some emotional distance until they figured out how to navigate this new terrain. Instead, he heard himself say, I'm falling in love with you too, just so we're clear on that. Lydia made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. We're completely insane. Absolutely we are. This is going to be so complicated. The most complicated thing I've ever done, probably. Worth it, though? She tilted her head to look up at him. Yeah, Caleb said, kissing her forehead. Worth it. He left at midnight, driving home through empty streets with a smile he couldn't suppress and a heart that felt dangerously full. Mrs. Chen took one look at his face when he collected Ethan and smiled knowingly. Good work emergency, I think, she said. The best, Caleb agreed, and carried his sleeping son home. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in compartmentalization. At work, they maintained strict professional boundaries. Lydia was the CEO, Caleb was her assistant, and their interactions stayed within those parameters. In meetings, they disagreed when appropriate. Caleb challenged her decisions when his insight suggested alternatives, and Lydia pushed back without favoritism. To the casual observer, nothing had changed. But after hours, in the stolen moments between Caleb's parental responsibilities and Lydia's endless work demands, they built something that felt increasingly real. Late-night phone calls after Ethan was asleep. Weekend coffee before either of them had to be on for the world. A stolen lunch in Lydia's office with the door locked and the blinds closed, where they could just be two people trying to figure out how to be together. Ethan met Lydia properly on a Saturday afternoon at the park, a casual encounter that Caleb had spent 3 days planning to seem spontaneous. He'd worried about how to introduce this relationship to his son in a way that felt safe and honest without being overwhelming. But watching Lydia crouch down to Ethan's level to admire his latest dinosaur toy collection, listening to her ask genuine questions about T-Rex versus Velociraptor superiority, seeing her laugh at his son's 5-year-old logic, all of it felt easy in a way that terrified Caleb with its rightness. She's cool, Ethan declared after Lydia left to handle a work crisis. Can she come to my birthday party? Your birthday's not for 4 months, buddy. I know, but I want her to come. Can she? 4 months. The same timeline as their contract. The same expiration date that hung over everything they were building. Caleb pushed the thought away and focused on the present. I'll ask her, he promised. The magazine profile ran in early October, complete with photos of them looking every inch the power couple. Lydia commanding and beautiful, Caleb supportive and confident. The chemistry between them undeniable. The accompanying article painted their relationship as a modern fairy tale. Successful CEO finding love with the thoughtful single father who valued substance over status. They made us sound like a romance novel, Lydia said, reading the piece on her tablet over breakfast in her apartment. It had become their routine, Saturday mornings at her place after Caleb dropped Ethan at his friend's house for a playdate. These few hours where they could just be together without performance. Better than making us sound like a scandal, Caleb pointed out. True, though I'm not sure which would be worse for managing board expectations. She set down the tablet and pulled him closer on the couch. My mother called. She saw the article. Wants to have dinner with both of us next week. That sounds ominous. It's Patricia Monroe. Everything she does is ominous. But I think she's actually coming around to accepting this relationship. You impressed her at brunch. By not running away when she was being difficult? By being exactly who you are without apology. She respects that. Lydia kissed him slowly. So do I. Flattery will get you everywhere. Good to know. They were interrupted by Caleb's phone buzzing insistently. He ignored it once, then twice, but the third call made him check the screen. Unknown number. His stomach dropped. Unknown numbers were never good news. Hello? Is this Caleb Reed? A woman's voice, unfamiliar, professional. Yes? Who's this? My name is Jennifer Morrison. I'm an attorney representing Sarah Reed. I believe you know her as your ex-wife. The world tilted sideways. Caleb stood up abruptly, his entire body going cold. What do you want? Lydia sat up as well, concern immediate on her face. Caleb held up a hand, needing to focus on the call, his heart hammering against his ribs. Ms. Reed has recently completed a rehabilitation program and wishes to discuss modified custody arrangements regarding your son, Ethan. She's prepared to file a petition with the court if you're unwilling to negotiate directly. She disappeared with him for 2 years. She put him through hell. The court gave me full custody for a reason. People change, Mr. Reed. Ms. Reed has documentation of her rehabilitation, stable employment, and appropriate housing. She's not seeking full custody, simply visitation rights that would allow her to rebuild her relationship with her son. No. The word came out flat, absolute. My answer is no. If she wants to fight this in court, she's welcome to try. But I will spend every dollar I have and every favor I can call in to make sure Ethan stays safe. I understand you're protective, Mr. Reed, but I should warn you that fighting this will be expensive and drawn out. Ms. Reed is prepared for a lengthy legal battle. Are you? Caleb thought about his bank account, the money from Lydia's arrangement that had given him breathing room but wasn't infinite. He thought about the cost of lawyers, court fees, the months or years it could take to resolve this. He thought about Ethan, who was finally stable and happy, having to relive the trauma of his mother's abandonment. Tell Ms. Reed that if she actually cared about Ethan's welfare, she wouldn't be threatening to drag him through court battles. She'd respect that he's settled and safe and doesn't need her disrupting his life again. I'll relay your message. Expect formal paperwork within the week. The call ended. Caleb stood in the middle of Lydia's living room, phone still clutched in his hand, feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. Caleb? Lydia's voice was gentle. What happened? My ex-wife. She wants custody modification. She's threatening to take me to court if I don't negotiate. Lydia crossed to him immediately, taking his hands. Okay, we'll handle this. You need a lawyer, a good one. I know people. I can't afford the kind of lawyers who could actually fight this, Caleb interrupted, the reality crashing down on him. The money from our arrangement will help, but a custody battle could take years. It could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't have that. I don't have anywhere close to that. Then we'll figure it out. Caleb, look at me. She waited until his eyes met hers. You're not alone in this. Whatever you need to protect Ethan, we'll find a way. This isn't your problem. You're my... She stopped, searching for the right word. You're important to me. Ethan's important to me. That makes this my problem too. Lydia, I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm offering. Let me help you. Caleb wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain his independence, wanted to prove he could handle this himself. But the truth was, he couldn't. Not without destroying the stability he'd built for Ethan, not without risking everything. I don't know what to say, he admitted. Say you'll let me make some calls. Say you'll at least talk to the lawyers I recommend. Say you'll stop trying to handle everything alone. He pulled her into his arms, holding on like she was the only solid thing in a world that had just started spinning out of control. Thank you for not running when everything got complicated. Complicated is kind of our thing, Lydia said into his shoulder. Besides, I don't run. You should know that by now. They spent the rest of the morning on damage control, Lydia making calls to her legal contacts, Caleb reviewing his custody documentation, both of them trying to prepare for a battle neither had anticipated. By the time Caleb had to leave to pick up Ethan, they had a plan. Consultation with a family law specialist on Monday, document review to identify any vulnerabilities in his custody position, and a strategy to demonstrate his stability and fitness as a parent. This is going to get ugly, Caleb said at her door. If it goes to court, everything comes out. My financial situation, our arrangement, all of it. It could damage your reputation. Let it, Lydia said fiercely. I'm not losing you because my reputation might take a hit. We'll be strategic about it, but we're not running from this. I'm falling more in love with you every day, you know that? Good, because I'm already completely gone on you. She kissed him hard. Go get your son. Be present with him. Don't let him see you panic. And Caleb, we're going to win this. I don't lose battles that matter. Driving to pick up Ethan, Caleb tried to process the past hour. His ex-wife reappearing after years of silence. The threat of losing Ethan. Lydia's immediate, unwavering support. The way she'd called him important. The way she'd offered resources without making him feel like charity. The way she'd refused to let him face this alone. He'd spent 3 years building walls around himself and Ethan, creating safety through invisibility and isolation. Now those walls were gone, demolished by a fake relationship that had become real and a woman who saw through all his carefully maintained defenses. And instead of feeling exposed and vulnerable, he felt stronger, like maybe he didn't have to carry everything alone anymore. Ethan was full of stories about his playdate, dinosaur battles, and bike races, and some complicated game involving pirates that Caleb couldn't quite follow. He listened and responded appropriately while his mind spun through worst-case scenarios and legal strategies and the weight of what he was risking. Daddy, you're doing the worried face again, Ethan observed from the back seat. Sorry, buddy, just thinking about grown-up stuff. Is it bad grown-up stuff? Caleb met his son's eyes in the rearview mirror and chose honesty. It's complicated grown-up stuff, but I'm going to handle it. You don't need to worry. Okay, can we have pizza for dinner? Yeah, we can have pizza. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Caleb sat on his couch and stared at the formal letter that had been slipped under his door while they were out. Legal letterhead, court filing numbers. His ex-wife's attorney demanding preliminary discussions about custody modification. The words blurred together, but the threat was crystal clear. His phone buzzed with a text from Lydia. Stop spiraling. We have a plan. Trust the process. Trust me. He typed back, I do trust you. That's what scares me most. Why does that scare you? Because trusting people means they can hurt you, and I've been hurt before. So have I. But I'm choosing to trust you anyway. Can you do the same? Caleb looked at that message for a long time before responding. Yeah, I can do the same. Good. Get some sleep. Monday we start fighting back. He tried to sleep, but his mind wouldn't stop running through scenarios. What if Sarah had actually changed? What if the court decided she deserved visitation? What if Ethan had to see her, had to be reminded of the trauma of her disappearance? What if fighting this meant exposing every aspect of his life to legal scrutiny, including his relationship with Lydia? What if he lost his son? The thought was so viscerally terrifying that Caleb got up and checked on Ethan, standing in the doorway of his son's room, watching him sleep with his stuffed dinosaur clutched close. He'd survived Sarah's disappearance. He'd survived the financial devastation of the custody battle. He'd survived years of grinding poverty and instability. He could survive this too. But this time he wouldn't survive it alone. This time he had Lydia Monroe standing beside him, offering resources and support and love that he was still learning to accept. This time felt different. And whether that was hope or delusion, Caleb wasn't quite sure. But standing in his son's doorway, watching the steady rise and fall of Ethan's breathing, feeling his phone buzz with another message from Lydia, he chose to believe it was hope. He chose to believe they could win this. He chose to believe that maybe, just maybe, he'd finally found something real enough to fight for. Even if that meant risking everything he'd built. Even if that meant trusting someone with the parts of himself he'd kept locked away for years. Even if that meant admitting he couldn't do this alone. Caleb returned to the couch and opened Lydia's latest message. Still awake? Can't sleep. Me either. Come over. Bring Ethan if you need to. I have a guest room he can sleep in. You shouldn't be alone right now. It was after midnight. It was impractical. It meant waking his son and driving across town and accepting help that made him feel simultaneously grateful and vulnerable. It meant acknowledging that he needed someone, that isolation wasn't strength, that letting people in was worth the risk. Caleb looked around his small apartment, at the life he'd built from nothing, at the walls that had protected him and Ethan for 3 years. Then he made a choice. Give me 30 minutes. We're coming. Lydia was waiting in her building's lobby when they arrived, still dressed despite the late hour, her expression softening when she saw Caleb carrying a half-asleep Ethan through the doors. She didn't say anything, just led them to the elevator and up to her apartment, where she'd already prepared the guest room with fresh sheets and a small nightlight that cast gentle stars across the ceiling. I thought he might like the stars, she whispered as Caleb settled Ethan into the bed. His son barely stirred, clutching his dinosaur and immediately burrowing into the pillows with the easy trust of children who felt safe. He loves them, Caleb said quietly, smoothing back Ethan's hair. Thank you. For this. For all of it. They retreated to the living room, and Caleb collapsed onto her couch with the boneless exhaustion of someone who'd been running on adrenaline and anxiety for hours. Lydia sat beside him, pulling his head onto her shoulder, and they stayed like that in the dim light while the city glittered beyond the windows. Tell me the whole story, she said finally. Not the edited version. Everything about Sarah, about what happened, about why you're so terrified. So Caleb did. He told her about meeting Sarah in college, the whirlwind romance that had felt exciting until it became chaotic, about the pregnancy that had accelerated a marriage neither of them was ready for, about Sarah's struggles with addiction that he hadn't fully understood until it was too late, about coming home one day to an empty apartment and a note that said she needed to figure herself out, taking their 3-year-old son with her. I reported it immediately, Caleb said, his voice hollow with the memory. But she'd planned it, crossed state lines, changed her name, found ways to stay off grid. The cops said unless I could prove she was endangering Ethan, it was a custody dispute, not a kidnapping. Do you know how powerless that feels, knowing your child is out there somewhere and you can't find him? Lydia's arms tightened around him. I can't imagine. I hired a private investigator I couldn't afford, spent every dollar I had tracking leads that went nowhere. Lost my job because I couldn't focus, couldn't function. My parents helped when they could, but they're retired, living on fixed income. It took 8 months to finally locate them in Arizona. Then another 16 months of court battles to get him back. What was the judge's reasoning for giving you full custody? Sarah had multiple drug-related arrests during the time she had him, failed to maintain stable housing. Ethan showed signs of neglect, malnutrition, missed medical appointments, behavioral issues from trauma. The evidence was overwhelming. The judge terminated her parental rights entirely, said she was a danger to his welfare. So why is she coming back now? Lydia's voice had gone hard, the CEO tone that meant she was strategizing. Her lawyer claims she's been through rehab, has 2 years sober, stable employment. She's arguing that she's a different person now and deserves a chance to rebuild her relationship with her son. But Ethan doesn't remember her as anything except the person who took him away from you. He was 3 when she left, 5 when you got him back. His memories of that time are traumatic at best. Exactly. But family courts are biased toward reunification. Judges like to believe in redemption stories. If Sarah can prove she's genuinely changed, if she has good lawyers and sympathetic framing, she might actually get visitation rights. Over your dead body, Lydia said flatly. That's not how courts work. I can fight it, and I will, but it'll cost everything I have and then some. And even if I win, Ethan will be dragged through depositions and evaluations and having to relive the worst period of his life. There's no good outcome here. They sat in silence for a long moment, Caleb feeling the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. Then Lydia shifted, sitting up to look at him directly. What if we accelerate the timeline? What timeline? Our arrangement. The public relationship. What if instead of waiting out the 6 months, we get married? Caleb stared at her like she'd started speaking a different language. What? Think about it strategically, Lydia said, and he could see her mind working through the angles. You're arguing that Ethan needs stability, consistency, a safe home environment. A marriage to someone with significant resources demonstrates all of that. It shows the court you're providing not just adequacy, but genuine family structure. It undermines any argument Sarah makes about your fitness as a parent. Lydia, you can't be serious. We've been together for what? A month? A real month, not even counting the performance part. So what? People get married faster than that all the time. And we have documentation of a 6-month relationship if anyone questions the timeline. The magazine profile, the public appearances, all of it supports a narrative of serious commitment. That's insane. Marriage it's permanent. It's not a strategic move in a custody battle. It doesn't have to be permanent, Lydia said, though something flickered in her expression when she said it. We could structure it with a prenup that allows for dissolution after the custody situation is resolved. Clean, simple, mutually beneficial. You're talking about a marriage of convenience. I'm talking about using every resource available to protect your son. Caleb, you said yourself that fighting this could bankrupt you. My legal team costs nothing because they're already on retainer. My resources are unlimited. My reputation in this city carries weight with judges and lawyers. A marriage to me changes the entire calculus of Sarah's case. Caleb stood up, needing to move, needing to think. This is crazy. We can't get married just to win a court case. Why not? We're already in a fake relationship for strategic purposes. This is just the logical extension. Except it's not fake anymore. The words burst out of him, louder than he'd intended. He lowered his voice, conscious of Ethan sleeping down the hall. It's not fake, Lydia. What we have is real. I'm in love with you. Getting married as a legal strategy cheapens that. Or it protects it, Lydia countered, standing to face him. What happens if Sarah wins? If she gets visitation and it traumatizes Ethan? If the legal battle destroys you financially and emotionally, how does our relationship survive that? At least this way, we're building something positive out of a terrible situation. And what happens after? When the custody case is settled and we've served our purpose for each other? We just get divorced and move on? I don't know, Lydia admitted, and the vulnerability in her voice cracked something in his chest. I don't have all the answers, Caleb. I'm making this up as I go, same as you. But what I do know is that I can't stand by and watch you lose your son because you're too proud to accept help. And if marriage is the help that works, then I'm offering it. This isn't about pride. This is about not asking you to sacrifice your future for my problems. What if I want to? Lydia stepped closer, taking his hands. What if protecting Ethan and protecting you feels like exactly what I should be doing? What if this isn't sacrifice, but choice? Caleb looked down at their joined hands, at the woman who'd somehow become essential to his life in the span of a few chaotic weeks, and felt the careful walls he'd built crumbling completely. If we do this, it has to be real, not a legal maneuver with an exit strategy. Real marriage, real commitment, for better or worse and all that. You're proposing to me while I'm proposing to you? A small smile played at Lydia's lips, despite the seriousness of the conversation. I'm saying if we're going to do something this insane, we do it all the way. No prenup specifying dissolution timelines. No safety nets. We jump in and figure it out together. That's terrifying. Yeah, it is. But so is everything worth having. He pulled her closer. Lydia Monroe, will you marry me for real? Not as strategy, not as convenience, but because we're apparently crazy enough to build something permanent out of all this chaos? She laughed, and it sounded like relief and terror and joy all mixed together. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you for real, though I reserve the right to think we're both completely insane. Deal. They sealed it with a kiss that felt like a vow in itself, standing in her living room while the city lights sparkled and a 5-year-old slept peacefully down the hall, oblivious to the fact that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't possibly understand. We should probably tell people, Lydia said eventually, still wrapped in his arms. My mother is going to have opinions, many, many opinions. My parents are going to think I've lost my mind. Have you? Completely. But I've never been more sure of anything. They spent what remained of the night planning logistics with the same focus they'd bring to a business merger. Timeline, as soon as legally possible, which meant a marriage license and a short waiting period. Venue, courthouse, simple and fast, nothing that would generate media speculation before they were ready. Witnesses, minimal, maybe Marcus and Andrea, people who already knew the situation. Announcement strategy. After the custody paperwork was filed, using the marriage as evidence of stability rather than letting Sarah's legal team frame it as a desperate response. By the time the sun rose, they had a plan. Caleb checked on Ethan, found him still sleeping peacefully, and returned to find Lydia making coffee in her pristine kitchen. I should probably ask how you take your coffee, she said, considering we're about to get married. Black, 2 sugars. How do you not know that? We've had coffee together dozens of times. I've watched you make it. I've never made it for you. That feels like something a wife should know. We're going to be terrible at this, aren't we? Caleb accepted the mug she handed him. The whole traditional marriage thing. Absolutely terrible. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we make our own version. Ethan woke up an hour later, padding into the living room with his dinosaur and a confused expression. Daddy, why are we at Lydia's house? We had a sleepover, buddy. Is that okay? It's cool. Can we have pancakes? Lydia had been in the middle of reviewing emails on her tablet, but she set it aside immediately. I can attempt pancakes. I should warn you that cooking isn't my strong suit. That's okay. Daddy burns them sometimes too. They ate slightly misshapen pancakes at Lydia's breakfast bar, while Ethan chattered about the stars on the ceiling and whether Lydia had any games he could play. Watching her interact with his son, patient, engaged, genuinely interested in his 5-year-old logic, Caleb felt the decision they'd made in the early morning hours solidify into something that felt right, despite its insanity. After breakfast, while Ethan was occupied with a tablet game, Caleb pulled Lydia aside. We need to tell him about us getting married. He should hear it from me before anything becomes official. Do you want me there, or would you rather do it alone? I want you there. He should understand that this is about all of us, not just me making decisions for him. They sat down with Ethan in the living room, and Caleb tried to figure out how to explain adult complexity to a 5-year-old who still believed the world was fundamentally simple. Buddy, I need to talk to you about something important. You know how Lydia and I have been spending a lot of time together? Ethan nodded, his attention shifting from the tablet to his father's serious tone. Well, we've decided that we want to be a family, like an official family, which means Lydia and I are going to get married. Ethan's eyes went wide. Like a wedding? With a cake? Maybe a small cake, Lydia said, smiling. But yes, a wedding. And then you'll be my mom? Ethan turned to Lydia with the blunt curiosity of children who hadn't learned to fear difficult questions. The room went quiet. Caleb felt his throat tighten, aware of the weight of that question, of the trauma underneath it, of Sarah's absence and the scars it had left. Lydia crouched down to Ethan's level, her expression gentle. I know you had a mom before who went away, and that was really hard. I can't replace her or make that hurt go away. But if you want, I'd like to be someone you can count on, someone who's here for you, who cares about you, who's part of your family. We can figure out what to call me together, okay? Whatever feels right to you. Ethan considered this with heartbreaking seriousness. Can I call you Lydia, Mom? You can call me whatever you want, sweetheart. Okay, Lydia, Mom. He tested the words, then smiled. I like it. Does this mean we get to live in your house with the stars? Caleb and Lydia exchanged glances, realizing they hadn't actually discussed that logistics. "We'll figure out the details," Caleb said. "But yeah, we'll probably live here. Is that okay with you?" "It's cool, but can we bring my stuff and can Mrs. Chen visit?" "Of course we can bring your stuff, and Mrs. Chen can visit whenever she wants." "Okay, can I go back to my game now?" Just like that, Ethan had processed a life-changing announcement and moved on, his 5-year-old brain accepting the new reality with the adaptability of children. Caleb watched him return to the tablet, then looked at Lydia, who had tears in her eyes. "Lydia, Mom," she said quietly, "I wasn't expecting that. Are you okay with it? I'm terrified and honored and completely overwhelmed, but yeah, I'm okay with it." The next days were a blur of legal preparation and logistical coordination. Lydia's family law attorney, a formidable woman named Catherine Reeves, met with them Monday morning and immediately grasped the tactical advantages of the marriage. "Sarah's case relies on arguing that you're providing minimal stability," Catherine explained, spreading documents across her conference table. "Single father, modest income, small apartment. Her lawyers will paint a picture of a struggling parent who can't offer the same opportunities as a rehabilitated mother with family support. Your marriage to Ms. Monroe obliterates that narrative completely." "What about the timing?" Caleb asked. "Won't they argue it's obviously strategic?" "Let them. You have 6 months of documented relationship history. The magazine profile alone establishes this as a serious, committed partnership. The timing of the marriage might be accelerated by the custody threat, but that's a reasonable response to wanting to provide stability for your son. Courts appreciate defendants who take proactive steps to strengthen their family situation. So we file for the license this week, get married next week, and use that as part of our response to Sarah's petition?" "Exactly. We demonstrate that Ethan's home environment includes not just an adequate parent, but a complete family structure with significant resources and stability. It puts Sarah in the position of disrupting that stability rather than providing an alternative to inadequacy." They filed the marriage license Tuesday afternoon at a courthouse that processed such things with bureaucratic efficiency. The clerk barely looked at them, just processed the paperwork, and handed over a receipt with their ceremony date, 8 days away, the minimum waiting period. "That's it?" Caleb said as they walked back to the car. "We just filled out forms, and now we're getting married in 8 days? Were you expecting something more romantic?" Lydia's tone was teasing, but he could hear the nerves underneath. "I was expecting it to feel more momentous. Instead, it feels like getting a driver's license. We can make the actual ceremony more meaningful. Small, but ours." They told their families that night. Caleb called his parents in Florida, his mother's shriek of excitement nearly deafening through the phone. "Married? Caleb Andrew Reed, you've known this woman for how long?" "Long enough to know she's right for me, Mom. And the timing works with some legal stuff I'm handling around Ethan's custody." "Legal stuff? What legal stuff? Is Sarah causing problems again?" He explained the situation, his mother's excitement shifting to protective fury, his father's quiet support coming through in the background questions. By the end of the call, they'd promised to fly up for the ceremony despite the short notice, and his mother was already planning to spoil Ethan with grandparent enthusiasm. Lydia's conversation with Patricia Monroe was predictably more complex. They drove to the Monroe estate that evening, Caleb's hand tight in Lydia's as they faced her mother in the same elegant sitting room where they'd had brunch weeks earlier. "Married," Patricia repeated, her tone carefully neutral. "In 8 days. I assume there's a strategic reason for this haste." "There is," Lydia said evenly. "Caleb's ex-wife is challenging his custody arrangement. Marriage strengthens his legal position and provides stability for Ethan." "So this is a business arrangement?" "No." Caleb spoke up, his voice firm. "This is a commitment I'm making because I love your daughter and want to build a life with her. The timing is driven by legal necessity, but the decision is about us." Patricia studied him for a long moment, her expression inscrutable. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. "Good. I was hoping you'd say that. The Monroe family has enough strategic marriages in its history. It's refreshing to see my daughter choosing something real." "You're not going to argue against this?" Lydia sounded genuinely surprised. Darling, I've watched you build a company while maintaining emotional distance from everyone in your life. I've watched you treat relationships like board negotiations. And then this man, she gestured at Caleb, appeared, and suddenly you're human again. You laugh. You take calls at odd hours and smile at your phone. You defend him to your family and to Gregory Hartford's insufferable posturing. If that's not love, I don't know what is. Mother, Lydia's voice caught. You don't have to explain yourself to me. Just be happy. And for heaven's sake, let me help plan something appropriate for the ceremony. Courthouse weddings are dreary. What followed was a whirlwind of Patricia Monroe taking control with the focused intensity of a general planning a campaign. The courthouse ceremony would stand for legal purposes, but she insisted on a small reception afterward at the Monroe estate. Nothing ostentatious, just immediate family and close friends, an acknowledgement that this was significant even if the timeline was compressed. Your father would have liked him, Patricia said to Lydia while reviewing catering options. Charles always respected people who worked for what they had rather than inheriting it. The comment made Lydia's eyes fill with tears, and Caleb watched her mother pull her into a rare embrace, the two of them reconciling something that had been fractured for years. The wedding itself happened on a Thursday morning in a courthouse conference room that had seen thousands of similar ceremonies. Caleb wore one of the suits from his Monroe Industries wardrobe. Lydia wore a simple cream dress that made her look luminous, and Ethan stood between them in tiny dress pants and a bow tie, taking his role as ring bearer with heartbreaking seriousness. Marcus and Andrea witnessed, along with Caleb's parents and Lydia's mother. The judge who performed the ceremony was the same one who'd presided over Caleb's custody case 2 years earlier. Catherine Reeves had arranged it deliberately, ensuring that the marriage would carry weight when the custody challenge inevitably reached court. Do you, Caleb Reed, take Lydia Monroe to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do. His voice was steady, his eyes locked on Lydia's. And do you, Lydia Monroe, take Caleb Reed to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do. She smiled, radiant and terrified and absolutely certain. The rings they'd chosen were simple gold bands, purchased in a rush the day before, but when Caleb slid his onto Lydia's finger, it felt like the most important thing he'd ever done. When she repeated the gesture, her hands trembling slightly, he felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for years. By the power vested in me by the state, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. The kiss was soft and sweet, appropriate for their small audience and 5-year-old witness, but it carried promises that went far beyond the legal contract they'd just signed. When they broke apart, Ethan was clapping enthusiastically, and Caleb's mother was crying happy tears, and Patricia Monroe was smiling with genuine warmth. Congratulations, Mrs. Reed, Caleb said, testing out the name. I'm keeping Monroe professionally, Lydia replied. But personally, yeah, Mrs. Reed works. The reception at the Monroe estate was elegant and intimate, exactly what Patricia had promised. Champagne and light food, a small cake that Ethan took great joy in helping cut, toasts from family that managed to be both touching and appropriate. Gregory Hartford sent a gift with a card that was aggressively passive-aggressive, which they all agreed to find amusing rather than insulting. But the best moment came late in the afternoon, when most of the guests had left, and Caleb found Lydia standing alone on the terrace overlooking the gardens. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against him with a sigh that released tension he hadn't realized she'd been carrying. We did it, she said quietly. We actually got married. Having second thoughts? Not even a little. You? Only about whether I deserve you, but I'm working on accepting that I do. She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to frame his face. We deserve each other. The good parts and the complicated parts and everything in between. Even when my ex-wife drags us through legal hell? Especially then. Caleb, we're going to win this. Catherine already filed our response to Sarah's petition. We have resources, documentation, and now we have a marriage that demonstrates complete family stability. Sarah's case was weak before. Now it's nearly impossible. I want to believe that. Then believe it. Believe in us. Believe that sometimes the crazy choices are the right ones. He kissed her there on the terrace while the sun set over the Monroe estate grounds, while their son played with Caleb's parents inside, while the weight of legal battles and uncertain futures pressed down on them. But for that moment, standing there with his wife, that was going to take some getting used to, Caleb let himself believe that maybe everything would actually work out. That night, they moved his and Ethan's belongings to Lydia's apartment, the place that would now be their home. It didn't take long. They didn't have much, 3 years of minimalist living fitting into a few boxes and suitcases. But watching Ethan arrange his toys in his new room with the star ceiling, seeing his clothes hanging in a closet 10 times the size of what he'd had before, Caleb felt the profound shift in their circumstances. "This is real now," he said to Lydia as they stood in the doorway of what was now their bedroom. "No more going back to separate lives at the end of the day. This is our life." "Scared?" she asked. "Terrified. You?" "Absolutely, but also happier than I've been in longer than I can remember." She pulled him into the room, closing the door behind them. "Come to bed, husband. We have a custody battle to win tomorrow, but tonight we get to just be us." And for the first time in years, Caleb went to sleep not on a couch in a tiny apartment, not alone with the weight of single parenthood crushing down on him, but in a comfortable bed next to the woman he loved, in a home big enough for all of them, with his son safely sleeping down the hall and a future that looked less like survival and more like actually living. The legal papers from Sarah's attorney arrived the next morning, formal and threatening, demanding preliminary discussions about visitation rights and modified custody arrangements. But this time, when Caleb read through them, he had Catherine Reeves on speed dial, legal resources that could match anything Sarah's team brought, and a marriage certificate that fundamentally altered the battlefield. This time he wasn't facing it alone. This time he had everything to fight for and the means to win. This time felt different. And as Lydia squeezed his hand across the breakfast table while Ethan ate cereal and chattered about his new room, Caleb let himself believe that different might actually mean better. Catherine Reeves didn't waste time. Within 48 hours of receiving Sarah's petition, she'd filed a comprehensive response that laid out Caleb's case with surgical precision. The marriage certificate was prominently featured, along with documentation of Lydia's resources, character references from Monroe Industries executives, and a detailed accounting of Ethan's stability and well-being over the past 2 years. But Catherine also went further, requesting that the court conduct a full investigation into Sarah's claims of rehabilitation before granting any modifications to the existing custody order. "We're not playing defense," Catherine explained during a strategy session in her office. "We're challenging every premise of her case. She claims she's changed? Fine, let her prove it under scrutiny. She claims Ethan would benefit from her presence? We'll counter with expert testimony about the trauma of reintroducing an unstable parent. She wants to paint you as inadequate? We'll bury the court in evidence of exactly how adequate you are." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out, which gave them time to prepare but also left Caleb in a state of sustained anxiety that he tried desperately to hide from Ethan. His son had noticed the tension, asking questions about why Daddy seemed worried and whether everything was okay. Caleb and Lydia had agreed to be honest without being frightening, explaining that Ethan's birth mother wanted to visit, but that they were working with lawyers to make sure any decisions put Ethan's feelings first. "I don't remember her," Ethan had said, his face scrunched in concentration. "Is that bad?" "No, baby," Caleb had assured him. "You were very little when you last saw her. It's okay not to remember." "Do I have to see her if I don't want to?" "We're going to do everything we can to make sure you feel safe and comfortable. That's what matters most." Work became both a distraction and a complication. Lydia had to recuse herself from any direct involvement in Caleb's employment decisions to avoid appearance of impropriety, which meant Marcus became his direct supervisor for the duration of the custody case. It was awkward but necessary, and Marcus handled it with grace, treating Caleb professionally while clearly supporting him personally. "For what it's worth," Marcus said one afternoon when they were alone in the conference room, "everyone at the company is rooting for you. Sarah's case is bullshit, and we all know it." "Thanks, though I'm pretty sure half the company thinks I married Lydia for her money." The other half thinks she married you for your pretty face. Either way, what actually matters is whether it works. Does it work? Caleb thought about waking up next to Lydia each morning, about the easy domesticity they'd fallen into despite the circumstances, about watching her help Ethan with homework while simultaneously fielding calls from the Tokyo office. Yeah, it works. Then screw what anyone else thinks. The whispers were inevitable, though. Marriage announcement so soon after the relationship went public, custody battle emerging immediately afterward, obvious strategic timing. The gossip mill at Monroe Industries churned with speculation, and Caleb could feel the weight of judgment from people who assumed they understood his motives. It stung more than he wanted to admit, this assumption that he was using Lydia, that their marriage was calculated rather than real. Ignore them, Lydia said when he mentioned it. People always reduce things they don't understand to the most cynical interpretation. Let them think what they want. We know the truth. The truth is we did get married for strategic reasons, at least partially. The truth is we got married because we're in love, and the timing happened to also serve a legal purpose. Those things can both be true, Caleb. Stop letting other people's limited imagination make you doubt what we have. She was right, but doubt was a persistent thing, whispering in the quiet moments that maybe he had manipulated this situation. Maybe he'd taken advantage of Lydia's feelings to secure resources he couldn't otherwise access. Maybe he was exactly the opportunist that Sarah's lawyers would inevitably paint him as. The doubt crystallized into something more concrete 2 weeks before the hearing when James Hendrickson contacted him directly. The email was professionally worded but carried an unmistakable threat. Caleb, heard about your legal situation through mutual connections. I think we should talk before things get messy. Some information about your past might be relevant to the court's assessment of your character. Coffee this week? Caleb stared at the email for a full minute before showing it to Lydia. She read it once, then immediately forwarded it to Catherine Reeves with a message that was pure controlled fury. Document this as attempted intimidation. Find out who hired him and bury them. What could he possibly know that would matter? Caleb asked, trying to think through what information James might have that could be damaging. Doesn't matter. Even the appearance of witnesses coming forward with negative information can influence judicial perception. We need to get ahead of whatever he's planning to say. Lydia was already typing rapid-fire messages to her legal team. Catherine will handle it. That's what we pay her for. But the damage was psychological as much as legal. James knew something, or thought he did, and the uncertainty of what he might reveal gnawed at Caleb. His engineering career had ended badly. He knew that much. The divorce, the custody battle, the financial collapse. He'd burned bridges, missed deadlines, failed to deliver on commitments. There were probably former colleagues who'd be happy to testify that he'd been unreliable, unprofessional, a mess. Catherine dealt with James Hendrickson with the efficiency of someone who specialized in making problems disappear. She had him served with a cease and desist letter within 24 hours, threatening legal action if he contacted Caleb again or shared any information with Sarah's legal team without proper subpoena. She also had her investigators dig into his background, finding enough questionable business dealings to make it clear that any testimony he might offer could be thoroughly impeached. He was fishing, Catherine reported, hoping you'd panic and offer him something to stay quiet. When my letter arrived, he backed off immediately. He's not going to be a problem. But the incident rattled Caleb more than he wanted to admit. It was a reminder that his past wasn't completely buried, that there were people who remembered him at his worst, that Sarah's lawyers would dig up everything they could to undermine his credibility. And if they dug deep enough, they'd find the restraining order he'd filed against Sarah during the custody battle, the accusations he'd made about her drug use and neglect, the ugly details of a marriage that had imploded spectacularly. I need to tell you something, he said to Lydia that night after Ethan was asleep. They were in their bedroom, Lydia reviewing briefing documents while Caleb paced restlessly. About the divorce, about how bad things got before Sarah disappeared. She set down her tablet and gave him her complete attention. Okay, tell me. I filed for divorce 6 months before she took Ethan. She'd been stealing money from our accounts to pay for it, disappearing for days at a time. I tried to get her help, tried interventions and rehab programs, but she wouldn't stick with anything. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Couldn't watch her destroy herself. Couldn't expose Ethan to that chaos. So I filed. That's completely understandable, Caleb. I also filed a restraining order, said she was a danger to herself and to Ethan, used her drug arrests as evidence, documented the times she'd left him alone while she was high, built a case that she was an unfit mother. His voice cracked. I destroyed her in legal filings, Lydia. Systematically documented every failure, every lapse in judgment, every moment of her at her worst. And then she disappeared with our son, and I spent 2 years wondering if it was my fault, if I'd pushed her into something desperate. Lydia crossed to him, taking his hands. You were protecting your child. That's not destruction. That's parenting. But what if Sarah's lawyers use that history against me? What if they say I was vindictive, that I prevented her from getting help, that I drove her away? The restraining order got dismissed eventually because she wasn't contesting it. And when she disappeared, it looked like I'd been exaggerating the danger because she'd managed to keep Ethan safe for almost 2 years. Except she didn't keep him safe. She moved him across state lines without permission, failed to maintain stable housing, got arrested multiple times while responsible for his care. The judge who gave you custody saw through whatever story she was telling. Catherine can make sure this judge does too. I just feel like every piece of my past is a weapon they can use. My failed career, my failed marriage, the fact that I was working as a janitor when we met. They're going to paint a picture of someone unstable, unreliable, opportunistic, and some of that picture is going to be accurate. Stop. Lydia's voice was firm. You're not unstable. You survived an impossible situation and built a safe life for your son from absolutely nothing. You took work that was beneath your qualifications because it gave you what Ethan needed. You're here now, in this marriage, because you fought for every inch of stability you could give him. That's not opportunism. That's strength. You have to say that. You're my wife. I'm saying it because it's true. And because tomorrow when we meet with Catherine to prepare for the hearing, I need you to believe it too. Self-doubt reads as guilt in court. You need to walk in there knowing you did everything right, even when it was hard. The final preparation session with Catherine was grueling. She drilled Caleb on every aspect of his history, every decision he'd made, every moment that Sarah's lawyers might exploit. They practiced answers to hostile questions, rehearsed how to maintain composure under cross-examination, reviewed the timeline of events until Caleb could recite it in his sleep. The key is consistency, Catherine emphasized. Your story hasn't changed because it's true. You've been fighting for Ethan's safety since before Sarah disappeared. Everything you've done has been in service of that goal. Don't apologize for it. Don't soften it. Own it. The night before the hearing, Caleb couldn't sleep. He lay in bed next to Lydia, watching shadows move across the ceiling, his mind running through every possible disaster scenario. What if the judge believed Sarah's rehabilitation story? What if they ordered supervised visitation and it traumatized Ethan? What if this entire fight had been for nothing? I can hear you thinking, Lydia murmured, rolling over to face him in the darkness. Talk to me. What if we lose? What if everything we've done isn't enough? Then we appeal, and we keep fighting. But Caleb, we're not going to lose. Catherine's case is airtight. We have resources Sarah can't match. We have documentation of Ethan's stability and well-being. We have a marriage that demonstrates commitment to his future. Her case is built on the premise that she's changed, but change doesn't erase history. The judge is going to see that. I wish I had your confidence. Borrow mine until you find your own. That's what marriage is for, right? Supporting each other through the impossible things. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, drawing strength from her certainty, even when his own had evaporated. I love you. I know I don't say it enough, but I do. You've saved me in ways I can't even articulate. You've saved me too, from a life of strategic emptiness and corporate isolation, from becoming my mother's version of success instead of my own, from giving up on the idea that I could have something real. She kissed him softly. We're going to win this, Caleb, and then we're going to build an actual life together, with Ethan, with all the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of it. The hearing was held in family court on a Tuesday morning that felt like the end of the world and the beginning of something else all at once. Catherine had prepared them for what to expect: formal proceedings, a judge who would ask questions, testimony from both sides, a decision that might not come immediately. But walking into that courtroom, seeing Sarah Reed for the first time in 3 years, hit Caleb with an emotional impact he hadn't anticipated. She looked different, healthier maybe. Her hair was neat, her clothes professional, her posture suggesting someone who'd gotten their life together. But when her eyes met his across the courtroom, he saw the same calculating assessment he remembered from their worst fights, the same ability to perform stability while chaos lurked underneath. Sarah's lawyer opened with exactly the argument Catherine had predicted, a redemption story. Sarah Reed had struggled with addiction, yes, but she'd completed a rigorous rehabilitation program. She had 18 months of documented sobriety. She had stable employment as an administrative assistant. She had family support from her parents who were committed to helping her rebuild her relationship with her son. All she wanted was a chance to prove she'd changed, to be part of Ethan's life in whatever way the court deemed appropriate. Ms. Reed made mistakes, her lawyer acknowledged. Serious mistakes that she deeply regrets. But people can change. Families can heal. Denying Ethan the opportunity to know his biological mother punishes both of them for past actions that Ms. Reed has worked incredibly hard to overcome. Then it was Catherine's turn, and she dismantled Sarah's case with the precision of a surgeon. Yes, Sarah had completed rehabilitation, but she'd completed 2 previous programs before this one, both of which she'd abandoned within months. Yes, she had employment, but she'd been in her current position for only 4 months. Yes, she had family support now, but those same family members had enabled her addiction for years before cutting her off. And most critically, she had disappeared with Ethan for 20 months, during which time she'd been arrested 3 times, evicted twice, and failed to maintain any consistent housing or childcare. Your Honor, the question before this court isn't whether Ms. Reed has made recent improvements in her life. The question is whether those improvements are substantial enough and sustained enough to justify disrupting the stability of a child who has finally, after years of trauma, found security. Ethan Reed is thriving. He has a safe home, excellent health care, educational support, and a family structure that provides consistency and love. Ms. Reed wants credit for 18 months of sobriety. Mr. Reed has provided 3 years of unwavering stability. The comparison isn't even close. The judge asked questions, lots of questions, about the timeline of Sarah's disappearance, about Caleb's restraining order and why it had been filed, about the marriage to Lydia and whether it was genuinely for Ethan's benefit or strategically timed. Catherine fielded each one with calm authority, but Caleb felt his stomach churning with anxiety as the proceeding dragged on. Then the judge asked to hear from Caleb directly. He stood, his hands shaking slightly, and faced the woman who held his son's future in her hands. Mr. Reed, I've reviewed the case file extensively. I presided over your original custody hearing 2 years ago, and I remember being struck by your dedication to your son despite extraordinary circumstances. Tell me, in your own words, why you believe Miss Reed should not be granted visitation rights. Caleb took a breath, thought about everything he'd rehearsed with Catherine, and chose honesty instead of strategy. Your Honor, I don't know if Sarah has genuinely changed. I hope she has. I hope she's found the help she needed and built a better life. But what I do know is that my son is 5 years old and he doesn't remember her. What he remembers is being taken away from his father, being moved constantly, being scared and confused. It took me a year to help him feel safe again after I got him back. He still has nightmares sometimes. He still asks me if I'm going to disappear like his birth mother did. The judge's expression softened slightly. Go on. I remarried recently, yes. And yes, the timing was influenced by this custody challenge. But I didn't marry Lydia Monroe for her money or her resources. I married her because she's given Ethan and me something we've never had, an actual family. She helps with homework. She attends school events. She learned to make his favorite pancakes even though cooking isn't her strength. She's been more of a mother to him in 2 months than Sarah was in his first 3 years of life. That's not fair, Sarah interjected, her lawyer trying to quiet her. I was sick. I needed help. You didn't give me a chance. I gave you multiple chances, Caleb said, his voice steady despite the emotion roiling inside him. I paid for 2 separate rehab programs. I covered for you at work when you couldn't function. I put my own career on hold trying to keep our family together. And when you took our son and disappeared, I spent every dollar I had and every connection I could find trying to get him back. So no, Sarah, I didn't deny you chances. You threw them away. The courtroom went silent. The judge made a note on her legal pad, then looked at Sarah. Miss Reed, would you like to respond? Sarah stood, and Caleb saw tears on her face, though he couldn't tell if they were genuine or performed. I know I made terrible mistakes. I know I hurt Ethan and hurt Caleb, but I'm different now. I'm healthy. I'm stable. All I want is a chance to be part of my son's life. Please, Your Honor, don't take that away from me. The judge looked between them for a long moment, then addressed both legal teams. I'm going to take a 30-minute recess to review the evidence and consider testimony. We'll reconvene for my decision. Those 30 minutes felt like hours. Caleb sat with Lydia and Catherine in a conference room adjacent to the courtroom, unable to eat the coffee and pastries someone had brought, unable to do anything but replay the hearing in his mind and wonder if he'd said enough, if he'd been convincing, if he'd protected his son adequately. You did well, Catherine said. The judge responded to your honesty. That moment when you talked about Lydia learning to make pancakes, that was perfect. It humanized the relationship beyond strategic advantage. But was it enough? We'll know in a few minutes. When they returned to the courtroom, the judge's expression was unreadable. She asked everyone to remain standing while she delivered her ruling, and Caleb felt Lydia's hand find his, squeezing tight. I've considered the evidence and testimony presented by both parties, the judge began. Miss Reed's rehabilitation efforts are commendable, and I don't take lightly the desire of a parent to reconnect with their child. However, this court's primary obligation is to the best interests of the child, not the wishes of the parents. Caleb's heart was hammering so hard he could barely hear over the sound of his own pulse. The evidence shows that Ethan Reed has experienced significant trauma as a result of Ms. Reed's actions during the period of her custody. While she has made recent strides towards stability, 18 months of sobriety does not erase the profound impact of her previous actions on this child's well-being. Furthermore, Mr. Reed has demonstrated consistent, unwavering commitment to his son's welfare and has recently established a stable family structure that provides Ethan with the security he desperately needs. The judge looked directly at Sarah. Miss Reed, I believe you when you say you've changed, but change requires time to prove itself sustainable. This court is not prepared to risk Ethan's emotional stability on a gamble that your recent improvements will last. Your petition for modified custody is denied. Mr. Reed retains full legal and physical custody of Ethan Reed. Sarah made a sound that might have been a sob, her lawyer putting a restraining hand on her shoulder. Caleb felt his knees go weak with relief so profound it was almost painful. However, the judge continued, I am not closing the door entirely. Ms. Reed, if you maintain your sobriety and stability for a minimum of 2 years from today's date, you may petition this court again for supervised visitation. At that time, we will also consider Ethan's age and his own wishes regarding contact with his biological mother. But until such time, this custody arrangement stands as ordered. The gavel came down, and it was over. Catherine was shaking his hand. Lydia was hugging him. People were talking, but Caleb couldn't process the words over the rushing in his ears that was relief and victory, and the realization that Ethan was safe, truly safe, for at least the next 2 years. Outside the courtroom, Sarah approached them, her lawyer hovering nervously. Caleb, can we talk? Just for a minute? He looked at Lydia, who nodded, then at Catherine, who stepped back to give them space while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. What do you want, Sarah? I wanted to say I'm sorry for all of it, for taking him, for the years I put you through, for not being the mother he deserved. I know you don't believe I've changed, and I don't blame you, but I'm going to prove it. I'm going to get my 2 years, and then I'm going to try again. And maybe by then you'll see that I'm serious. If you're serious, you'll respect that Ethan has a family now. You'll understand that forcing your way back into his life is about your needs, not his. You'll maybe consider that the best thing you can do for him is let him be happy. He's my son, too. No, Caleb said, surprised by how calm he felt. He's my son. You gave up the right to claim him when you disappeared for 2 years. If you genuinely love him, you'll accept that and move on with your life. He didn't wait for her response. He turned and walked back to Lydia, who took his hand without a word, and together they left the courthouse and the weight of Sarah's claims behind them. In the car, Caleb finally let himself fully process what had happened. We won. We actually won. Of course we won, Lydia said. Catherine's a beast and your case was solid. Plus you were completely credible on the stand. The judge believed you because you were telling the truth. I thought I'd feel more relieved. Instead, I just feel exhausted. That's normal. You've been carrying this weight for weeks. It takes time to put it down. She squeezed his hand. But Caleb, it's over. Sarah can't touch Ethan. We can actually start living our lives instead of defending them. They picked up Ethan from school together, both of them taking the afternoon off to be present for this moment. He came running out of the building with his backpack bouncing, launching himself at Caleb with the enthusiasm of 5-year-olds who hadn't learned to temper their affection. Daddy! Lydia, Mom! Why are you both here? Did something happen? Something good happened, buddy, Caleb said, crouching down to his level. Remember how we talked about the legal stuff with your birth mother? The judge decided that you're going to stay with me and Lydia, Mom. Everything stays the same. You're safe. Ethan processed this with typical 5-year-old pragmatism. Okay, can we get ice cream to celebrate? They got ice cream, ate it at the park while Ethan played on the equipment, and Caleb and Lydia sat on a bench watching him, shoulders pressed together, relief settling into something that felt like joy. Thank you, Caleb said quietly. For everything. The lawyers, the support, the marriage, all of it. I couldn't have done this without you. You could have. It would have been harder and taken longer, but you would have found a way. That's who you are. Lydia leaned her head on his shoulder. But I'm glad you didn't have to do it alone. I'm glad we get to do this together. The contract expires in 2 months, our original 6-month arrangement. I'm aware. Think we should renew it? Or maybe just forget it ever existed and be actually married instead of contractually obligated? Lydia laughed. I vote for actually married. The contract served its purpose, but I'm ready for the real thing. All in, no safety nets, just us figuring it out together. That's terrifying. Everything worth having is terrifying. You taught me that. They sat there until the sun started setting, watching Ethan play, talking about the future in terms that felt possible now instead of impossible. Moving Caleb's name onto the deed of the apartment, planning a real honeymoon once things settled down, discussing whether Ethan would attend private school or public, where they'd spend holidays, how to balance Lydia's demanding career with Caleb's desire to be present for his son. Normal problems. Happy problems. The kind of complications that came from building a life together rather than just surviving. That night, after Ethan was asleep, they sat together on the couch in the living room that had become theirs, and Caleb felt something shift inside him. The tension he'd carried for years, the constant vigilance against the next crisis, the fear that everything could be taken away at any moment, it started to ease. Not disappear entirely, because trauma didn't work like that, but recede enough that he could imagine a future defined by something other than defending what he had. I want to go back to engineering, he said suddenly. Not immediately, but eventually. I want to use my degree again, do work that challenges me intellectually. Is that okay? Why wouldn't it be okay? Lydia looked genuinely confused by the question. Because I work for you, because our whole situation started with you needing me in a specific role at Monroe Industries. Caleb, that was the arrangement. This is our marriage. You can work wherever you want, doing whatever makes you happy. Actually, Monroe Industries has an engineering division that could probably use someone with your process optimization background. If you wanted to transfer internally, I could make that happen. Or if you wanted to work somewhere else entirely, that's fine too. You'd be okay with me not working for you? I'd be thrilled if you found work that actually used your skills instead of just filling a position we created for appearances. The special assistant thing was always temporary. Time to figure out what comes next. What came next, it turned out, was a transfer to Monroe Industries' engineering division, where Caleb's background in process optimization made him immediately valuable. He started slowly, part-time, while he adjusted to the new role, but within months he was leading projects and remembering why he'd loved engineering in the first place. The intellectual challenge, the satisfaction of solving complex problems, the sense of building something rather than just maintaining it. Lydia watched him come alive professionally with visible satisfaction. You're good at this. I mean, I knew you were smart, but seeing you actually work in your field, you're really good. Feels like waking up after a long sleep. like I'm finally using my brain again instead of just going through motions. That's how I felt when I started actually running Monroe Industries instead of just managing my father's legacy. There's a difference between doing what you're supposed to do and doing what you're built for. They fell into rhythms that felt sustainable rather than desperate. Morning chaos getting Ethan ready for school. Lydia's packed schedule balanced against Caleb's project deadlines. Evening dinners where they actually talked about their days instead of just surviving them. Weekends that mixed work obligations with family time. Neither one perfect, but both getting easier with practice. Ethan thrived in ways that broke Caleb's heart with gratitude. He made friends at his new school. His nightmares decreased in frequency until they were rare instead of regular. He started calling Lydia Mom without the prefix, a shift that happened naturally over months until one day Caleb realized his son had integrated her into his identity as a parent rather than just a presence. "Is that okay?" Lydia asked when Caleb mentioned it. "I don't want to replace... I know Sarah is his biological mother, even if she's not present. Sarah gave birth to him. You're raising him. There's a difference. And yeah, it's more than okay. It's everything." 6 months after the custody hearing, they got a letter from Sarah's lawyer. Not a legal filing, just a notification that Sarah had completed her 2-year sobriety milestone early and was beginning the petition process for supervised visitation. Catherine reviewed it and confirmed they'd need to respond, but the tone was different now, requesting rather than demanding, acknowledging Caleb's primacy as Ethan's parent rather than challenging it. "What do you want to do?" Lydia asked after they'd read through the letter together. "I want to protect Ethan, but I also want him to grow up knowing that people can change, that second chances are possible, that forgiveness is worth considering. I don't know if Sarah has genuinely changed or if she's just better at performing stability, but maybe that's not my call to make anymore." "You're considering allowing visitation?" "Supervised, controlled, extremely limited visitation, after Ethan is old enough to have some say in the decision. Maybe when he's 7 or 8, old enough to express what he wants, to say no if it doesn't feel safe. I don't want him to be a teenager wondering why I never gave his birth mother a chance to prove herself." "That's incredibly generous, considering what she put you through." "It's not generous. It's strategic in a different way. I'm thinking about who I want Ethan to become. And I want him to become someone who believes in redemption while maintaining healthy boundaries. Can't teach that if I model absolute rejection." They drafted a response with Catherine that laid out specific conditions. 2 more years of documented sobriety, therapeutic evaluation of Sarah's readiness for parental contact, Ethan's own preferences being paramount in any visitation decisions, supervised contact in neutral settings with the right to terminate if Ethan showed signs of distress. Sarah's lawyer accepted the terms without argument, perhaps recognizing that this was more than she had any right to expect. But that was years away from implementation, and in the meantime, life kept moving forward. Caleb's engineering projects grew in scope and complexity. Lydia successfully fought off a hostile takeover attempt and emerged with Monroe Industries stronger than ever. Ethan started first grade, lost his first tooth, learned to ride a bike without training wheels. Normal life. Actual, sustainable, normal life. 1 year after their courthouse wedding, they had a ceremony. Nothing like Patricia Monroe's originally planned reception, but something that felt more authentically theirs. A small gathering in the Monroe Estate Gardens. Ethan is ring bearer again, but old enough this time to take the responsibility seriously. Vows that they wrote themselves and actually meant without legal pressure, forcing the words. "I promise to keep learning how to make your favorite pancakes," Lydia said, her voice thick with emotion, "and to always fix your tie when it's crooked, and to believe in you even when you don't believe in yourself. I promise to be a mother to Ethan, not because a contract says I should, but because he's become my son in every way that matters. I promise to build this life with you, in all its messy, complicated, beautiful reality." Caleb's vows were simpler but no less meaningful. "I promise to stop waiting for everything to fall apart. To trust that what we've built is solid enough to last, to let you carry some of the weight instead of trying to manage everything alone. I promise to love you not just for saving me, but for showing me what it means to actually live instead of just survive. I promise to make you happy, every day, in whatever small ways I can." When they kissed, Ethan cheered enthusiastically, and Caleb's parents cried happy tears, and Patricia Monroe smiled with genuine warmth, and everything felt exactly right in a way that had nothing to do with strategy or arrangement or mutual benefit. That night, after the guests had left and Ethan was asleep, Caleb and Lydia stood in the same spot where they'd stood after their first public appearance together, the terrace overlooking the gardens, the city lights twinkling beyond. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" Lydia asked, her hand finding his in the darkness. "When you were adjusting my tie in that hallway, did you picture this?" "I pictured escaping as quickly as possible without hyperventilating. You terrified me." "I terrified you? You stopped breathing when I touched you. I thought I'd somehow triggered a medical emergency." "You did. Just not the kind that requires an ambulance." He pulled her closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume. "I love you. Not because you saved Ethan, not because you gave us security, not because you fought for us in court, just because you're you. Lydia Monroe Reed, CEO and terrible cook and the best mother my son could have asked for." "I love you too. Caleb Reed, engineer and single father, and the man who taught me that control isn't the same as strength, that vulnerability isn't weakness, that letting someone in doesn't mean losing yourself." They stood there until the night grew cold, holding each other, talking about nothing and everything, making plans for a future that felt limitless instead of constrained. And when they finally went inside, walking past Ethan's room where their son slept peacefully under his star ceiling, Caleb felt something he'd never quite managed to feel before. Complete. Not because his life was perfect, it wasn't, and never would be. Not because all his problems were solved, new ones would inevitably emerge. Not because he'd finally achieved some imagined finish line of success, but because he'd stopped running, stopped hiding, stopped believing that safety required invisibility and love required impossible perfection. He'd found someone who saw all of him, the failures and fears, the complicated history and uncertain future, and chose him anyway. Who stood beside him not because a contract mandated it, but because she wanted to. Who built a family with him not out of strategic advantage, but out of genuine love. And that, Caleb realized as he fell asleep next to his wife with his son safe down the hall, was worth more than all the security and stability in the world. It was worth everything. The next morning started like any other, which was perhaps the greatest gift of all. Ethan bounded into their bedroom demanding pancakes. Lydia groaned about the early hour, but got up anyway, and Caleb started coffee while mentally running through the day's engineering challenges. Normal chaos. Happy chaos. The kind of morning that wasn't remarkable, except in how remarkably ordinary it had become. "Daddy," Ethan said around a mouthful of pancakes that Lydia had managed not to burn, "are you happy?" The question was so direct, so perfectly childlike in its simplicity, that Caleb had to pause and really consider his answer. Was he happy? Not just content or stable or surviving, but actually happy? "Yeah, buddy," he said, looking at his son and then at his wife. At the kitchen in their home that still sometimes felt surreal in its spaciousness, at the life they'd built from a crooked tie, and a moment that shouldn't have mattered. "I'm really, really happy." "Good," Ethan declared with 5-year-old certainty. "Me too." And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the complicated beginning or the strategic middle or the questions about what came next. Just the simple truth that they were happy, they were together, and they'd stop pretending to be something they weren't. They'd become real. And real, Caleb had learned, was infinitely better than perfect,